All right, how's everybody doing? I am back. Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show, a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Tuesday, March 10th, 2020, and we are live. It's broadcasting about an hour ago. Many of you all saw that. After I voted, I was walking back home from voting. So I want to continue that discussion, and we're going to get into an analysis of the policies of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and how they would impact African Americans. Okay, so everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in, and I'm going to give you a lot of information here. Okay, all right. So I was. The previous broadcast that I did, my battery died on me and I was walking home. I was talking about how I was at precinct 124 here in Detroit voting. And I said, you never guess who was behind me voting, right? It was an Asian American woman who was behind me voting. And this gets into this whole myth. And I was explaining this, so go back and watch the first video. This gets into this whole myth that Asians don't vote, which is factually, historically inaccurate. This is factually, historically inaccurate. Asians do vote. What happens is their population is lower than ours. They make up about 5% of the U.S. populations. They've increased from 5% to 4% to 5%. And African Americans are 14% of the population. So in a lot of surveys that are done, polls, things like this, a lot of times Asian Americans are not polled. Okay, a lot of times Asian Americans are not polled. A lot of surveys you'll see an asterisk there for Asian Americans. Okay, but the Asian American population has increased, and also the percentage of the voting electorate has increased as well. It's increased from 3.5% to 5%. All right. So I talked about the segment from NBC News from Tremaine Lee. Okay. Tremaine Lee did a segment on NBC News in the past few days that talked about the Asian American voter, etc. And what people have to understand is that when we use the term Asian American, that's a very, very broad term. Okay, I found the clip. I'm going to share that with you. Share the article. Share the clip. When people use the term Asian American, you're talking about people that are coming from about 20 different countries. You're talking about people who are coming from different cultures, different backgrounds. They speak different languages. It's totally unfair to try to compare the Asian American community to the African American community. When we talk about African Americans, we're talking about people, even though African Americans are not a monolith, we're talking about people who have more commonality, more of a common history, more of a we're more of a homogenous people. If we look at the year 1900, so the Great Migration is from 1915 to 1970. You have about 6 million African Americans migrating from the South up north. 1900, 90% of African Americans lived in the South. This is a legacy of slavery, okay? The 246 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation. You go into redlining, we go into Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, U.S. Supreme Court case. We go into an increase in lynchings. We go into solidification of Jim Crow laws. We move into World War I. At the end of World War I, 1919, the year after World War I ends, we have the Red Summer of 1919, where you have over 25 major race riots in this country. And we go into a World War II, Great Depression, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, things like this, right? So when we study our history, African Americans are, largely speaking, primarily English is our first language in general. And we have more common historical experiences in general. It's different than Asian Americans. So for instance, I'm going to give you a number of different articles here. If we look at Pew Research, and let me turn on the screen share. Okay, how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook pages, on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. Also, African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And also you can donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, and PayPal.me/the AHN show through PayPal. All right. So let me turn the screen share on. I want to show you something here. This is from Pew Research. This gives some background information on Asian Americans, okay? And then once I get through some of this history here, then we'll look at the policies of Bernie Sanders compared to Joe Biden and how they would impact African Americans, all right? So this is from September 8th, 2017. This is key facts about Asian Americans, a diverse and growing population. Key facts about Asian Americans, a diverse and growing population. The largest, if we look at paragraph 2, well, let's look at the first paragraph. The U.S. Asian population is diverse. A record 20 million Asian Americans trace their roots to more than 20 countries in East and Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. And let me blow this, let me zoom in. Let's see, can we zoom in anymore? Okay. I'm going to give you the link to this article so you can read it. I know it may be hard to read looking on your smartphone or what have you, okay? So you're talking about people coming from more than 20 countries in East and Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent, each with unique histories, cultures, languages, and other characteristics. So oftentimes, even for white Americans, but oftentimes African Americans, we talk about Asian Americans as one homogenous group. They are not. No. So let's look at this here. Let's look at some countries where Asian Americans are coming from. So this is looking at stats from 2015. Population estimates for the 19 largest Asian origin groups. They're coming from China, India. So people coming from India are classified as Asian by the US government. And for a lot of people, they say, well, that's strange. Well, you know, people coming from North Africa are classified as white by the US government. People coming from the Middle East are classified as white by the US government. There is no Arab classification according to the US government. Go to the 2010 US Census form, look at page 3, which breaks down the racial classifications. I think I got a copy of it here because this is the type of research I do. And when it talks about classification of white, oh, go look at that. It's not what you think it is. Yeah, here it is right here. I've dealt with this in a number of my lectures. Hold on, let me turn the screen share off for just a minute. Go to census.gov. This is the 2010 census form, okay? Census.gov is official website of the U.S. Census. By the way, the census has to hire 500,000 people to conduct the census, all right? So you can go to census.gov because they're hiring. If we go to, this is page 3, the racial classifications. Do I have it here? Let me see here. Let me see, is this the right one? This is to husband. I want to look at the racial classifications. Census start here. Well, if you go to census.gov, you can pull it up. But it has the page that shows racial classifications, and it shows it for white. It breaks down. See Hispanic origin. For white, it tells you that people originating in any of the European countries, but then also those coming from North Africa and the Middle East are classified as white. Let me see here. Okay, I can't find it now. But if you go look at that, so on the census form, there is no Arab classification on the census form. All right, they're classified as white. people coming from North Africa, even if they are Black Africans coming from North Africa, like Egypt, they're classified as white by the U.S. Census. There was a historic case in Detroit in 1978 of Mustafa Hefny, a man named Mustafa Hefny, okay? And Mustafa Hefny immigrates from Egypt in 1978. He's Nubian, he's Black African. And he said he went through immigration, and when he completed the process, he said they gave him his papers, and he said they told him, "You are white now, W-H-I-T-E, you are white now." And when you go look at the racial classifications from the U.S. government, those coming from North Africa, whether they're Nubian, whether they're Arab, what have you, are classified as white, okay? So we have to understand this game that's being played. All right, so let's go back to this here. Let's go back. This is from Pew Research. And let's break this down. Okay, so those from India are classified as Asian by the U.S. government. They're classified basically, you may hear referred to as Indian Americans, but in general, Asian Americans. So China, India, the Philippines, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, Pakistan, those coming from Pakistan are classified as Asians, okay? Pakistan used to be part of India. Pakistan, Cambodia, Hmong, Thailand, Laos, or Laotian, Bangladesh, Burma, Nepal, Indonesia, Malaysia, okay, Mongolia. All those people are classified as Asian American. So you're talking about people with various cultures, histories, backgrounds, various languages. They're all classified as Asian American. So when we look at this first paragraph, the U.S. Asian population is diverse. A record 20 million Asian Americans trace their roots to more than 20 countries in East and Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent, each with unique histories, cultures, languages, and other characteristics. Now, one of the things that Tremaine Lee points out in this segment he did on Asian Americans is that many of them come from countries where they didn't vote. They don't have a history of voting. They couldn't vote. So you can't compare that to African Americans who were enslaved for 246 years, fought for a 15th Amendment of 1870. So February 3rd, 2020 was the anniversary, was the 150th anniversary of the adoption and ratification of the 15th Amendment. It was the 15th Amendment that guaranteed the right to vote for African American men, not women, but for African American men. Is going to be the 19th Amendment of 1920 that is going to guarantee the right to vote to women. Now, as I've talked about before, nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give the right to anyone to vote. Nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give the right to anyone to vote. There was an article from Smithsonian Institute, okay? And I've just done recently some lectures on this in February and March. There's an article from Smithsonian Institute. Does an amendment give you the right to vote? Does an amendment give you the right to vote? That's from americanhistory.si.edu. I'll give you the links to these articles. americanhistory.si.edu. Read this article. When so the 15th Amendment, there are two sections to the 15th Amendment. It guaranteed the right to vote based upon not discriminating against color, race, previous class of servitude, like formerly being a slave, things like this. The 19th Amendment of 1920, and this year, 2020, is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed the right to vote to women. That is going to adopt the language largely of the 15th Amendment, okay? But nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give anyone the right to vote. So check out this article. So the 15th Amendment of 1870, this is during Reconstruction. Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. All right. You're going to have 22 African-American men who are elected to Congress. Hiram Rhodes Revels was the first African-American to serve in Congress. He was a U.S. Senator from Mississippi, and he was elected in 1870. Okay. So our history is entirely different. So you can't compare the two. Are there some things we may be able to learn from Asian Americans? Yeah, that's true. But we could learn more from our Jamaican and Haitian and Caribbean brothers and sisters and those from Nigeria and things like that, because our history is closer to them. Now, did Asian Americans face discrimination in this country? Did they face lynchings and things like this? Yes, that's true. Was it anything compared to ours? No, not at all. Okay. This is why you have to understand history. So for instance, we know 1942, February 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt during World War II ordered the internment of Japanese Americans. Okay. They were put into internment camps. That was Executive Order 9066, February 19th, 1942. We know that you had immigration laws targeting Asian Americans. We'll come back to that in just a second. That's 1917. That's during World War I. Okay. We know that Italian Americans are going to face discrimination in this country. Italian Americans are going to face lynchings as well. Now, 72% of the lynchings that take place between 1882 and 1968 were against African Americans. Okay, there was 4,743 lynchings recorded between 1882 to 1968. 72% are those of African Americans. There were 1,297 white people who were lynched during that same period of time. Okay, because the Ku Klux Klan and other groups, they're not just targeting African Americans, but many of them are targeting Republicans and white Republicans. Okay, but you're going to have Italians who are lynched, like in 1891 in New Orleans. History.com has a good article about this, the grisly story of America's largest lynching, the grisly story of America's largest lynching. Now, this wasn't the largest lynching in America, because you had the Elaine, Arkansas lynching of killing of somewhere, estimates are somewhere maybe about 200 or so sharecroppers. Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. That's during the Red Summer. Okay, but you have this lynching of 11 Italian Americans in 1891 in New Orleans. When we look at, for instance, give you another example dealing with the Chinese, you have the Chinese massacre of 1871 in Los Angeles. Okay, and if we look at, there's a good article on this here from the Los Angeles Public Library, Forgotten Los Angeles History, the Chinese Massacre of 1871. Okay, and in this massacre here, you had a number of Chinese that were lynched. I can't remember, it was 10 or 11 or so. You have the also, you're going to have the massacre of Chinese in Wyoming in 1885. Okay, history.com is a good article about this. Whites massacre Chinese in Wyoming territory. September 2nd, 1885, you had 28 Chinese who were massacred. And this dealt with the Chinese being used to work on the Union Pacific Railroad as strike busters. And you're going to have a mob of 500 white people and others who are going to attack and kill the Chinese. Okay, and if we look quickly here at, back at this article from, I think it's in this one here, they talk about Chinese coming to this country as laborers. Okay. But there's a history. Okay, there was another article dealing with that I saw. But you have a history of this. And then lastly, we look at 1917. Okay, 1917, you have in EJI.org, you see the articles I post from the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson's organization, and they deal with this date in history. a lot of them dealing with African American history. The Immigration Act of 1917. Immigration Act of 1917 restricts Asians, other non-white people from entering U.S. Okay, on February 5th, 1917, Congress passed the Immigration Act of 1917, also known as the Asiatic Barred Zone Act. Asiatic Barred Zone Act. It was intended to prevent, quote unquote, undesirables from immigrating to the United States. The act primarily targeted individuals migrating from Asia. Under the act, people from, quote, any country not owned by the U.S. adjacent to the continent of Asia, end quote, were barred from immigrating to the United States. The bill also utilized an English literacy test and increased tax and an increased tax of $8 per person for immigrants aged 16 years and older. The new bill was not meant to impact immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, but targeted Asian, Mexican, and Mediterranean immigrants in an attempt to curb their migration. Okay, sounds like what Trump is trying to do now. His immigration ban targeting Nigeria, and it was just another African country, and trying to tamp down on non-white people immigrating to this country. Okay, history repeats itself for those that don't know it. One author of the bill, Alabama Congressman John Burnett, estimated it would exclude approximately 40% of Mediterranean immigrants, 90% of those from Mexico, and all Indian and non-Caucasian immigrants. 90% of those from Mexico and 90% of those from Mexico and all Indian and non-Caucasian immigrants. The bill also restricted the immigration of people with mental and physical handicaps, the poor, and people with criminal records or suspected of being involved in prostitution. Proponents claim the bill would keep burdensome immigrants from entering the country and thus, quote, promote the moral and maternal prosperity, end quote, of new immigrants permitted to enter. The bill remained law for 35 years until the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952 eliminated racial restrictions on immigration and naturalization statutes, okay? So you really have to really understand the history of this country. We'll post this link here. Immigration Act of 1917 restricts Asians, other non-white people from entering the U.S. So this is during World War I. World War I is 1914 and 1918, okay? All right, so that's just a little background history, but their history, even though there were some lynchings of Asian Americans and things like this, there was some type of discrimination. There was nothing on the level of ours, but you can't compare African Americans to Asian Americans. Our African Americans are a much more homogenous group. We have more similarities, more of a common history, okay? But Asian Americans do vote as well. So if we look at this, let's go to this here. So I want to show you this. NBCnews.com has an Asian American platform, okay? A lot of people don't know this. NBCnews.com, their official website, they have NBC Black, which is an African American platform. They have articles, content there targeting the African American community. There is NBC Latino, okay, and also NBC Asian. All right, I go read the different articles from the different platforms. All right, so let's look at this here. Let's look at NBC News website. Over in the right-hand corner, you see at the top, you see the headings. Over in the right-hand corner, you'll see 3 horizontal lines. You click on those 3 horizontal lines, it takes you to the different departments and their different platforms. You see featured, right? Asian American, NBC Latino, NBC Black, right? Click on Asian American. Most people don't even know this exists. Click on Asian American. So then it takes you to the Asian American platform that has articles dealing with the Asian American community. First article up, Asian American lawmakers urge Congress members to help stop coronavirus fueled xenophobia. Because you have a lot of Chinese who are being targeted with hate crimes and things like this because they're suspected of having the coronavirus, because the coronavirus is believed to start in Wuhan, China. Okay, so we scroll down, we look right here. On Super Tuesday, Asian American and Pacific Islanders could wield serious clout. They're talking about the impact of Asian Americans and how they're being targeted, largely by the Democratic Party, but they're talking about Asian Americans and voting in the primaries for the 2020 election. Okay, so if we look at that article, it has the video, it has the segment that Tremaine Lee did dealing with Asian Americans, okay? On Super Tuesday, Asian American and Pacific Islanders hold potentially untapped clout. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders make up nearly 20% of California's electorate, and they could be poised to play an outsized role on Super Tuesday. All right, I'm gonna give you this link. I want to go to this clip here, this segment that Tremaine Lee did, because this gives a lot of historical background and gives a better understanding. Okay, and then I want to get into the policies of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. The Root.com, if you saw my Sunday night show, I dealt with this, but I only had like 20 minutes left in the show to deal with this. The Root.com did a analysis of the Black agendas of all the candidates and ranked them. Okay, we're going to get into that. Okay, how's everybody doing? Okay, so I want to go to next. Let's go to this. Where is that? Right here. I want to go to this clip here. Asian American voters discuss lack of representation in 2020 campaign. Asian American and Pacific Islanders make up 17% of the voters in California's they make up 17% of the voters in California's Democratic primary. MSNBC's Tremaine Lee spoke with community leaders about what it will take to drive Asian Americans to the polls. Okay, let's go to this. Let me see. Let's go to this clip. Hold on. Let's mute that right there. All right, let's go to this clip.
Islanders, or AAPIs, make up 17%. Asian American and Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, make up 17% of the electorate in California and are poised to play an outsized role in the ever-important Democratic California primary. And nowhere is that population greater or more for grabs than in Los Angeles, where we met with Manju Kulkarni, who leads a coalition of community organizations that advocate for AAPIs. So give us a sense of place. Where are we right now?
Well, we're in the heart of Koreatown. Right here is one of the largest Korean populations outside of South Korea. And just within a few miles, we have historic Filipino town, we have Little Tokyo, we have Chinatown. So really, you're talking about the entire sort of Asian continent being represented within a few miles.
What is the biggest misconception about the API community here in Southern California?
We continue to be adversely impacted by the model minority myth. Absolutely, there are some parts of our community that are doing really well financially, but there are other parts that aren't. You know, it's just like America.
AAPIs have historically turned out to vote at low rates, though that seems to be changing. In the 2018 midterms, there was a 14-point jump in Asian American turnout nationally, which is encouraging news for Esther Jung and Vince Lee. Both are trying to turn out voters in their communities. How much of the administration's actions on immigration and some of the very incendiary language about people from other countries, how much of a role is that playing in motivating people in the community to come out there and vote?
I really see that there's a growing anxiety and fear amongst people. I think more and more people are starting to realize that their citizenship matters and their rights really do matter when they exercise it.
When you go into elders' home and you want to say it's so important, there's an election coming up and here's how you can be involved, like what pitch works to them?
You know, I would say the buzzword is money. If you get counted for, you know, that money can redirect into Koreatown. It can help with homelessness. It can help with affordable housing. It can help with healthcare resources.
Are there politicians in 2020 on the Democratic side that do a better job of reaching out to the communities than others?
I've not seen a single Democratic candidate who is actively reaching out to Asian Americans.
Is it frustrating?
It's just really sad to see that, we don't get the representation that we deserve here.
Outside on the streets of Koreatown, we met a woman who planned to vote in the primary. What issues matter to you?
그런 사람이 있으면 찍겠습니다.
Her answer is actually whoever gives the most attention to this town, she'll vote for that candidate.
Have you ever seen any of the candidates in your community?
처음 봤어요.
She hasn't seen any candidates in her area.
Should they come?
여기 와야 되나요?
그러면 좋죠.
She said, that's great, of course, yeah.
Part of the challenge in courting AAPI voters is that many are new to voting itself and come from countries that don't have elections.
各位洛杉矶与纽约的听众朋友
Kat Chow is host of a Chinese language talk show in Los Angeles that educates new immigrants on voting and American democracy.
A lot of the new immigrants, they are just trying to understand the system. I think it takes time.
So voter education is first, letting folks know exactly how this actually works.
There you go. That's the thing. It's a long process. However, I think it works. People realize you need to participate and vote, and they use the vote as a voice.
There are some signs that candidates are taking the AAPI voting block more seriously in 2020. Several campaigns have launched AAPI outreach initiatives and added organizing staff. But will that be enough? Few are more well-positioned to know than Judy Shu. She was the first Chinese-American woman elected to Congress and represents a district that's made up of nearly 40% Asian Americans. I'm getting the sense that there's this big pot of Asian voters that's waiting to be tapped. And it seems like your district might be that big basket of voters.
AAPI voters are the swing voters in swing states. If you can really appeal to the AAPI voters, they do respond.
Okay, so that is from Tremaine Lee. That's from NBCnews.com. We posted the link here, posted the articles, all of that for you. That gives some background information. And you have to understand history to understand this, because he said a lot of these Asian Americans come from countries where they don't have a history of voting. Okay, so their background is entirely different. I just posted this article here from the Washington Post. This is another one I was looking for. I had it up, but I couldn't find it. This deals with the real secret to Asian American success was not education. The real secret to Asian American success was not education. Now, in the article, it talked about the Chinese Massacre of 1871. Asian Americans have been part of the United States for most of its history. The first major wave of immigrants came in the 1800s. Okay, so this is going to be later in the history. If you're starting it with the U.S. Constitution going into effect basically 1789, but still you're talking about after that. Okay, so the first major wave of immigrants came in the 1800s when Chinese laborers flocked to California to help build railroads. Their presence soon stirred up resentments among white Americans. The Chinese Massacre of 1871, which took place in the streets of Los Angeles, counts among the largest lynchings in U.S. history. So we posted that article. And then you go, I know I talked about it in the first broadcast I did. So go watch that one. That was only about 20, 25 minutes because my battery died on me on my phone. If you look at the first anti-drug laws in this country were the anti-opium laws in, I think it was San Francisco, in California. And these were directed towards Chinese men working on the railroads. And the fear was, what would these Chinese men do when they're high on marijuana? Would they try to sexually assault white women? Because as long as white people were using opium, it wasn't a problem. Okay? So there's a history here. That's why it's important to really understand the history of this country and understand the chronology of this history. All right? Okay, so if we look at I want to look quickly just to give a historical background on this. In the first broadcast I did, I talked about U.S. Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County versus Holder. It's important to understand Shelby County versus Holder because that ties into what we saw on Super Tuesday and the voter suppression that was taking place in Texas, okay? Texas has the most, Texas is the state with the most number of polling places that have been shut down from 2012 to 2018. There have been about 750 polling places shut down in Texas. Okay. And we know in the 2016 presidential election, there were 868 fewer polling places in 2016. That's a result of Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County versus Holder, U.S. Supreme Court case. So what happened was in 2012, and if you look at the article, when did African Americans actually get the right to vote? When did African Americans actually get the right to vote? From history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. In 2012, when President Barack Obama was on the ballot, there was a record number of African Americans who actually voted. 66.6% of African Americans who were registered to vote voted in the 2012 presidential election. It set a record for two reasons. One, that was the highest percentage of African Americans that ever voted in a presidential election. One. Two, that was the first presidential election where the percentage of African American voters, African Americans who voted, was greater than the percentage of white people who voted. Okay, so that was the first time in history. This scared a lot of white people to death, especially white Republicans. Not all white people, but especially white Republicans, because Republicans they don't have a growing party, they have a shrinking party. Okay, the population of the party is shrinking. So Republicans come back in 2013 with U.S. Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder. Now, what we don't understand, because many of us don't understand history, is that at the periods of time of progress of African Americans are always met with a white backlash. Okay, if we look at Reconstruction ending in 1877 with the Compromise of 1877, which awarded the presidential campaign. Rutherford B. Hayes became president, the Republican, and the Republicans agreed to remove the Union troops out of the South. The Union troops are protecting the rights of African Americans to a certain extent. This ends Reconstruction. This ends this period of progress of African Americans. Then we go into 1968, Richard Nixon being elected. Richard Nixon ran on a platform of law and order. Law and order basically means protect white people and lock up black people. Okay. Richard Nixon was a backlash to the civil rights movement, a backlash to the Black Power movement, was a backlash to a backlash to the rebellions that were taking place in this country. The 1967 Detroit Rebellion, Newark, New Jersey Rebellion, 67, all those things like that. Okay. He's a backlash to all of that. He's a backlash to 1965, the Executive Order 11246. Executive Order 11246 is what we call affirmative action, signed by President Johnson. So Richard Nixon is a backlash to all of that. And then from Richard Nixon, we're going to get 1971, his war on drugs, which targeted African Americans, which is going to cause the U.S. prison population in this country to explode. Okay, that didn't start in 94 with the crime bill, because from 1970 to 1993, the U.S. prison population in this country quadruples. The crime bill wasn't signed until September 13th, 1994. You got to go back and study history, going back to Richard Nixon and then Ronald Reagan's war on drugs in 1982. So when we saw Super Tuesday, March 3rd, MSN.com has an article, Black and Latino voters were hit hardest by long lines in the Texas Democratic primary. Okay, now there was a number of reasons why we saw those long lines. One of them had to do with the number of polling places that have been shut down in Texas. Okay, And in the article on page 2, it says Texas in particular has been making it harder for people to vote since Shelby County versus Holder, a 2013 Supreme Court case in which a divided U.S. Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which had required that jurisdictions with a history of discriminatory voting practices get the federal government's approval before changing their election rules. So what happened was, because of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, states that had a history, there were 9 states that had a history of poll taxes, literacy tests, things like this, putting obstacles in the way of African Americans voting. If those states wanted to make any changes to polling locations, the number of hours that you could vote, the number of weekends you could have early voting, when the number of weekends you can have souls to the poll voting, where a lot of African Americans go vote after church on Sunday. Those states had to get approval from a federal judge. That was the federal oversight. Shelby County versus Holder, when that Supreme Court case was decided, a 5-4 decision, it weakened Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which dealt with that pre-clearance. Right after that, all these states started coming out with these new voter ID laws. So the 2016 presidential campaign was the first presidential campaign in 50 years that you did not have the full power of the Voting Rights Act. In the 2016 presidential election, there were 868 fewer polling places. Okay. Today, there's 1,700 fewer polling places. When we look at Texas, 750 polling places were shut down between 2012 and 2018. 542 of those polling places were in communities that have a high African American or Hispanic population. So we're seeing this voter suppression. And what happens is if you don't understand history, when this backlash comes, you don't understand how to defend against it. And this is what's taking place. This happened in 2013. I do lectures across the country. I ask people about Shelby County versus Holder. 99% of the time, they don't know what I'm talking about. I ain't talking about 15, 16-year-olds. I'm talking about grown adults that don't know this. So is a term that I've coined called political self-defense. So when I deal with 6 principles of political self-defense, we're dealing with understanding this history, understanding how history and politics and law intersect, and understanding how to perceive these threats coming to you so you know how to defend against the threat. So we're dealing with voter suppression right now with the number of polling places that have been shut down. So the question I ask people is, if our vote did not matter, why do Republicans work so hard to suppress the African-American vote? If our vote does not matter, why do Republicans work so hard to suppress the African-American vote? Okay. All right. So we were hit with a double R campaign in 2016. We were targeted about Russians and we were targeted about Republicans with a voter suppression campaign from both of them. Read volume 1 of the Mueller report. Read volume 1 of the Mueller report, specifically pages 22 through 40, which dealt with how Russians and the Internet Research Agency targeted African Americans with a disinformation campaign. This is the version of the Mueller report from the Washington Post with supporting commentary and documentation. That was $10 at Amazon. All right, now, how's everybody doing? Let's see here who we have here. We've got Rajan. Who else? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. How's everybody doing? Johnny, Teresa, Vicky, Mary, Keith, Wayne, just a few of the people watching. All right, now let's go to, okay, so we got that. And okay, so we got that. And I'll post a link to this article also. It's a good one from history.com. When did African Americans actually get the right to vote? Okay, so if we look at this, and I dealt with this for about 20 minutes on my Sunday night show. Michael Harriet at theroot.com posted this article February 28th, 2020. February 28th, 2020. Every Democratic candidate's Black agenda ranked. Every Democratic candidate's Black agenda ranked. And, you know, you've heard me talk about the Root before. I ain't necessarily a big fan of the Root, but they do have some good articles here and there. But what they did with this is the first time I saw really a publication do something like this. What they did was they asked policy experts, legal scholars, and political pundits, all of whom were African American, to help them devise a policy matrix that they could grade the Black agendas or policies of the various candidates by. Okay. To do this, and what they did was, because they want to be able to look at how these policies will impact African Americans, what's the feasibility of these policies, what's the likelihood of them being implemented, things like this, okay? In the article, it says, now that the competitors had the chance to warm up their campaigns in the whiter states, they're talking about Iowa and New Hampshire, we decided to investigate how the contenders plan to address racism, inequality, and other issues that affect Black people. To do this, we examined each official candidate's campaign literature, as well as their past statements, policies, and political histories, okay? So they got with policy experts, legal scholars, and political pundits to create a policy matrix. And the policy matrix allows them to grade the policies. And then it says, then we graded each plan on a scale of 1 to 10 using the following criteria. Economics, so they're looking at reparations, where they stand on reparations, economic inequality, employment, and housing are just a few of the issues we will examine. 2, criminal justice. How do they handle the war on drugs, mass incarceration, bail reform, police brutality, and sentencing disparities? Education, funding for HBCUs, student loan debt, K through 12 funding, et cetera, et cetera. Number 4, politics. Does it address issues of voting rights, gerrymandering, and other political issues? Number 5, comprehensiveness. How detailed is their plan? Does it contain specific policy proposals? Number 6, blind spots. Are there important areas that are not addressed? Number 7, feasibility. What are the chances of the policies being enacted by legislation, executive action, or internal policy? Okay, because you've heard me say this before, a lot of the things that the candidates want to do have to pass through Congress, both chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. For a lot of these bills, you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, which means you're going to need some Republicans to vote for it, even if Democrats take back control of the U.S. Senate. This is why people in Kentucky have to vote Moscow Mitch McConnell out of office. He's up for re-election in November 3rd, 2020, okay? Moscow Mitch McConnell has to go because Democrats have passed 433 bills in 2019 in the House of Representatives. 80% of them die in the U.S. Senate. They're being blocked by Moscow Mitch McConnell. They're being voted down, while at the same time they are confirming these very ultra conservative right-wing federal judges that are Trump's nominations. So from January 2017 through December 2019, there were about 191 federal judges that Trump got confirmed. He's nominated 1/4 of the federal judges. If he gets, and a lot of these federal judges that are being confirmed are very young, ultra conservative white males. Many of them are anti-civil rights. When they have their confirmation hearings, many of them won't answer the question whether they thought Brown versus Board of Education was correctly decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, things like this. So they're focusing on turning back the clock on civil rights. There was an article from news.yahoo.com. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. So when Trump talks about make America great again, he's talking about going back to a time before civil rights. This is what he's talking about. February 12, 2020, Trump is elevating federal judges who could gut the Voting Rights Act. Trump is elevating federal judges who could gut the Voting Rights Act. So In the 2016 campaign, and we'll post this link here for you. In the 2016 presidential election, and I told people numerous times, this ain't about one person versus another person. This ain't about you liking somebody. You ain't taking them to the prom or anything like this. This is about understanding policy and the trajectory of this country, okay? There were 4,000 positions Trump had to fill in his administration. Now, he didn't fill all of them. We see he's been downsizing. We see this is one of the reasons why the coronavirus is spreading like it is because there were agencies and there were projects like the Predict Project that was used under George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. He defunded projects. He cut funding to the CDC. He got rid of a lot of scientists. He shut down the Predict Project. The Predict Project was one that monitored these various diseases in 49 different countries. Because what they did was first it was the funding was cut, then it was just shut down about October 2019. It was totally shut down. One of the countries that they stopped monitoring was China. All right, so what people are realizing now, when they're going to the polls to vote, Super Tuesday, today, and the next few weeks, they're realizing what happens when you have somebody who is totally incompetent, who doesn't understand science, who has declared war on scientists for the last 2 years. They understand how this impacts 329 million people. Okay, they realize elections have consequences. All right, so there was an article from Vox.com that dealt with Trump shutting down that one. I'll try to find that article because I have a bunch of articles here dealing with the coronavirus. You know, I'm surprised Trump. And then we see now that people who Trump has come in contact with, Republicans, have self-quarantined themselves. Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, his new chief of staff, Mark Meadows of North Carolina, who was a birther. We see Ignatius Louis Gohmert of Texas is not going to self-quarantine, right? They all came in contact with Trump. Trump has not taken a test yet. He says he feels fine. He says no need to take a test. Okay, you keep playing around with coronavirus if you want to. All right, let's see. I was trying to find that article. I got pages of stuff dealing with the coronavirus. But I'll give you that one. It's from Vox.com. We'll pull it up. All right, so let's look at this here. Just 1 second here. It was dealing with the Predict program. Hold on, I'm going to pull it up because I want you to read this. A crucial federal program tracking dangerous diseases is shutting down. This is from October 29, 2019. The name of the program is called Predict. Predict, a pandemic preparedness program, thrived under Bush and Obama, now is canceled. This was a program that would have alerted them to the coronavirus and its spreading so they could get ahead of it and head it off. Trump defunded it and shut it down. This is from Vox.com, October 29, 2019. Read this article, okay? This gives you an example of the level of how incompetent he is. And then you look at the one from MSN.com from, I think it was last week. Experts baffled as Trump asked why they can't just use flu vaccines to prevent coronavirus. He was in a meeting with the experts and Dr. Anthony Fauci and the virologists and doctors, and he asked, why can't you just use the flu vaccine to vaccinate people for the coronavirus? Okay. I tried to tell you, I tried to warn you 2016, people didn't listen. All right. So you have comprehensiveness, which is number 5. Number 6, blind spots. Are there important areas that are not addressed? Feasibility is number 7. What are the chances of the policies being enacted by legislation, executive action, or internal policy? Does the candidate have the political skill to make their plan come true? 8, history. What is the candidate's history of dealing with Black people, African Americans? Has the candidate displayed a willingness to address issues of racial and inequality? Number 9, intentionality. Intentionality. Do we believe them, or do they need more people? Can we objectively believe that the candidate will work for Black America? Is he or she pandering, or do they have is he or she pandering, or do they really have the will to make this a priority? Now, you've heard me talk about this before. A Black agenda is not what we wait on other people to give us. A Black agenda is what we put together, and that's what we present to the candidates. That gives us a barometer to measure the candidates by, measure their policies by, etc. Okay, so a lot of people say we want a Black agenda. People don't understand. That's what we organize. But to put together a Black agenda, you have to understand history, you have to understand politics, you have to understand policies that help create the conditions that we're dealing with today, so we understand which direction to go. And then I encourage people to look at some of the previous Black agendas. Here you can read Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson is one of my teachers. I know him personally, I've interviewed him a number of times. 2013, August of 2013, 60 civil rights organizations presented a Black agenda to the Obama administration. March of 2017, the executive leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus presented a 125-page Black agenda to the Trump administration. It's called "We Have a Lot to Lose." We have a lot to lose. 21st century solutions to for African American families. That's at cbc.house.gov. Go read it, okay? Because it's good and comprehensive. Now, Trump didn't do nothing with it because he has a hard time reading, but that's another story. But that is something good for us to take elements from that agenda to put together one for 2020. And then we've seen different Black Lives Matter organizations. Alicia Garza, for instance, they just came out with one, and that's getting support from another organization. Alicia Garza, she endorsed Elizabeth Warren. Okay, so we've seen numerous Black agendas. All right, number 6. Number 10. Impact. If implemented, what impact would these policies have? Would the plan affect the problems if it attempts to address? Okay, what's the impact? How would the plan affect the problems it attempts to address? Okay, now what they did was, if the candidates' campaign literature, and also their website, because I went and looked at about a month and a half ago, something like that. I went to go to the different candidates' websites to look at their websites, and look at their policies, and look to see if they had a Black agenda, a specific Black agenda. And I looked at basically I didn't look at Tulsi Gabbard, okay, but I basically look at all their platforms, their policies. So if the candidate's campaign literature does not include a specific Black agenda, they examined their individual policy proposals to see what effect their plan would have on Black America. So the highest score is 100, okay? So it goes from 0 to 100, because Tulsi Gabbard got 0, all right? Amy Klobuchar got a 22. Amy Klobuchar doesn't have a separate Black plan for America. However, so they list what they found. They break it. I'm not going to spend time on Amy Klobuchar. I don't need to do that. Michael Bloomberg got a 43. Okay? So some people say, well, Michael Bloomberg had the Greenwood Initiative, and contrary to popular belief, he wasn't the only one that had a Black agenda. That's not true. So some people say, well, he had a Greenwood Initiative. He wanted to create 100,000 more Black entrepreneurs. He was going to invest $70 billion in African-American communities. Okay, but Bloomberg dropped out of the race, and he endorsed Biden. So now what? We still need to look at all the policies, okay? Bloomberg got a 43. They looked at economics. Michael Bloomberg's plan gives broad strokes on how he plans to fix the wage gap. He wants to create new homeowners, end unfair lending practices, and tasks credit agencies, TASKS, tasks credit agencies with restructuring credit reporting. He also wants to invest in creating 100,000 more Black entrepreneurs. He supports a commission to look into reparations. So that sounds like HR 40. one of the things I say about reparations, and if you saw the broadcast, you saw the show from Sunday night, I talked about this. You still got to get this passed in the U.S. Senate. This is why I explain to people. Go read Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. You got to get this passed in the Senate. Moscow Mitch McConnell has already said reparations is dead on arrival in the Senate. He's Senate Majority Leader. No bill could come to the U.S. Senate floor for a debate or a vote without his approval. He's already said reparations is dead on arrival in the Senate. You can't even get an elections integrity bill passed in the Senate because Marsha Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, blocked 3 election integrity bills in the Senate recently based upon unanimous consent. Because a lot of times for you to go to the next step and just to debate a bill, it has to be unanimous consent among 100 senators, and they blocked it. So we got to understand the rules of the Senate. Okay, Moscow Mitch McConnell has to be voted out of office. He's up for re-election November 3rd, 2020. He has low ratings in Kentucky. African Americans in Kentucky got to unite with other people and vote his ass out of office. Seriously. Okay, Democrats have to take back control of the Senate. 1, you got to block these federal judges that Trump is getting confirmed in the city. 2, you can't get the bills in the House passed like July 2019. Democrats in the House of Representatives, I need a Democrat and a Republican, but I study policies and I see who's blocking policies that are beneficial to us. Okay. Democrats in the House of Representatives passed a bill to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, where it's been since 2009, to 15 cents an hour by 2025. Do you understand? If that gets passed and signed into law, that'll have a big positive impact on African Americans, when the average African American woman makes 61 cents for every dollar that the average white male makes. This is what Black Women's Equal Pay Day is all about. That was August 7th, 2019, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. In Louisiana, on average, African American women make 47 cents on every dollar that the average white male makes. It takes the average African American woman 20 months to make the same amount of money that the average white male makes in 12 months. They also passed the Paycheck Fairness Act early in the year in 2019. These bills are being blocked in the Senate, okay? So a lot of times people just focus on the president. And I'm saying, no, you got to understand Congress is a co-equal branch of government. You got to get most of these bills passed through the House of Representatives and the Senate before they can be signed into law by a president. It's the same thing with reparations. That has to pass through Congress. Go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, or archives.gov, and which is National Archives. And you can read the U.S. Constitution there, okay? And as I said on my show Sunday night, probably our best chance to get any type of comprehensive reparations would be the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866, because those are laws still on the books today. And many of our ancestors were in those treaties, and they got compensation because the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians all owned Black slaves. And when they got pushed off their land in southeastern United States because of the Indian Removal Act signed into law by President Andrew Jackson in 1830, they all were forced out west on over 1,000 miles of what's known as the Trail of Tears. They all go into Oklahoma. When we talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tulsa comes from a Creek Indian word, Tallahassee. Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street was, the Greenwood District, which was the business district there, that was founded by Creek Indians around 1836 who got pushed off their land in the southeastern United States. When they go into Tulsa, they take their African slaves with them. So because of these Indian treaties after the Civil War ends, the African slaves that they owned are going to be set free. They're going to be compensated with land. They're going to be given financial compensation as well. Okay, and they were made citizens of those various tribal nations. They got all the rights, things like that. They're going to be illegally pushed out of those treaties in 1941. But those treaties are still on the books today, being enforced for these 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans. This is how you get somebody like Sarah Rector, okay? Sarah Rector was the richest African-American girl in the country at this time, the early 1900s. She was a multimillionaire at something like 13 years old, Blackpast.org has an article about Sarah Rector. Sarah Rector's family was of Creek Indian, African enslaved ancestry. And they're in Oklahoma, they're going to get land from these Indian treaties. Oil was discovered on her land. She became a multimillionaire. She was so rich that white people wanted to classify her as white. They referred to her as Afro-American in the early 1900s. Blackpast.org has an article about this. Sarah Rector, she lived from 1902 to 1967, blackpast.org, okay? We'll post this link to this article. Go read this. So all this history ties in together. This ties into history, law, politics, etc. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So there's a foundation for this with the Black Freedmen Indian treaties, because we got documented evidence of some of our ancestors who got land. And when we study the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the book by Hannibal B. Johnson, when I was doing research on Tulsa, and I'm in the documentary from Your Black World Films and Dr. Boyce Watkins, Resurrecting Black Wall Street. That was one of my sources for doing research for my portion of that film. A lot of the early African-American landowners in Tulsa, Oklahoma got land because of these Indian treaties. Tulsa was not 100, where the North Tulsa is where African-Americans lived. The railroad tracks separated North Tulsa from South Tulsa. You still had some Native Americans that lived in North Tulsa because they were the ones who founded Tulsa, the Creek Indians. Hannibal B. Johnson has the book on, and I have 4 stacks of books here, so just, I don't know if I can put my hand on it right now. But he has a book dealing with Black Wall Street dealing with Black Wall Street Resurrection. Oh, here it is right here. Hold on, let me show you this book. Yeah, Black Wall Street, From Riot to Renaissance and Tulsa's Historic Greenwood District. It's probably one of the best books you read dealing with the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street. This is by Hannibal B. Johnson, okay? All right, so let's continue. So it is, so all this history ties together, and this ties into politics, all right? So let's jump into this here. And I know people are coming with different understandings, different levels of understanding of history. So I'm trying to give you some historical background to really understand this. Okay, so Mike Bloomberg got a 43. They go into education. On education, Bloomberg takes a moderate but fair approach. He plans to focus on HBCU, STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, and math, investing in schools and funding low-income areas. Bloomberg also proposes an end to legacy admissions. Legacy admissions is huge because see, some of the same people who attack affirmative action when it comes to college admission don't say nothing about legacy admission. Legacy admission benefits more white people and also more upper middle class, wealthier white people as well. Legacy, when you apply to college, you get on the application, there's a point system. For different parts of the application, you get a certain number of points, right? You get oftentimes preferential treatment if you have a parent who graduated from that college. Sometimes it's a grandparent who graduated from that college, things like this, right? That's called a legacy. And depending upon the institution and who your parent was or what have you, determines how much privilege you get, okay? That deals with legacy. The same people who attack affirmative action and say, oh, we have African Americans who are unqualified to go to this institution. They don't say nothing about unqualified white people who get into colleges because of legacy. They don't say nothing about that. All right, so politics. Bloomberg does have proposals to end gerrymandering and restore felony voting rights and make access to voting easier. He also plans to tackle white supremacist violence. He is one of the few candidates that confronts election security, which might be the only unique thing about his approach, okay? And let me say this from the start. This is not promoting one candidate over another, okay? I'm not doing this. if you support Bernie Sanders, I don't have a problem with that. Go vote for Bernie Sanders. If you support Joe Biden, I don't have a problem with that. Go support Joe Biden. Whoever you support, whoever you like, whoever you support, you like their policies, go vote for them. Okay? But being on Twitter and Facebook and attacking people who voted for somebody you don't like, because when we look, if you go watch the video I did the day after Super Tuesday, March 4th. Okay, Super Tuesday was March 3rd, March 4th. I did a recap on what happened in the results. Okay, Joe Biden blew all the political pundits away, won 10 states out of 14. Nobody saw that coming. All right, and I told people, stop listening to the political pundits on MSNBC and CNN, Fox News. To hell with them. Most of them don't know what they're talking about. Go vote for who you want to vote for. Don't listen to them. Okay, and when we look at with Bernie Sanders, what the exit polls show, and you can read this article from yahoonews.com, news.yahoo.com. This is from March 4th, 2020. Many young voters sat out Super Tuesday, contributing to Bernie Sanders' losses, right? So Bernie Sanders got tens of thousands of people showing up at his rallies, and he said he has the youth vote and things like this. Well, in general, they didn't show up to vote for him Super Tuesday in the numbers he predicted, the numbers he needed. So this is what a lot of people have to understand, especially millennials and Generation Z and things like this, right? If it's a candidate you like, you have to go vote for them. Period. So, I have friends who support Bernie Sanders. I have friends who support Biden. Okay, look, that's fine. I already said whoever gets the nomination, that's who I'm voting for. Period. Because we got to get Lucifer in the flesh out of the White House. Period. Okay? So I don't have a problem with that. All right? But don't attack other people that didn't vote for your candidate. Go talk. If you're going to talk to anybody, go talk to the young voters who supported Bernie Sanders and then go vote for him. Okay? Don't go attack other people who voted for the candidate you don't like. All right. So read that article from news.yahoo.com. Many young voters sat out Super Tuesday, contributing to Bernie Sanders' losses. Okay, let's continue here. So politics, okay, comprehensiveness, he gets a 4. Bloomberg has a little bit for everyone. He tackles police brutality, college admissions, economic justice, but just a little bit. More about that later. Blind spots, he gets a 4. Bloomberg does not really tackle K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade disparities, or sentencing reform, even in areas where he has a plan. He does not focus on some critical issues. Most of his plans take the billionaire approach by throwing money at the problem. His blind spot is that he thinks funding can decrease white supremacy. Okay, so for blind spots, he gets a 4. And feasibility, he gets a 2. Bloomberg's plans lack a lot of detail. For instance, his goal on reporting police shootings is to press state and local agencies to report all incidents to the FBI's use of force data collection. Plus, he has no legislative experience or history of building a consensus. Most of his policies don't spell out how he will enact them. Okay. Now, 2 things. Let's see here. Where are we? Which screen are we on? Just a second. All right. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast. And I know in the broadcast earlier, people were asking me about who I voted for. I don't get into who I voted for. I tell people I voted for me and you, your mama and your cousin too, because the policies of the president impacts 329 million people, impacts 49 million African Americans. Okay. So I'm not here to promote one candidate over another, promote the candidate I voted for. I am not here for any of that. Okay. Who vote for who you want to vote for based upon the evidence, based upon the policies. Okay. And I'm not here to attack anybody. Now, if you vote for Trump, which I don't know what to tell you, but okay. But I'm not, if you voted for one candidate over the other, I'm not mad at you. Olitha, Ricardo, Michael, how's everybody doing? Okay, let's continue this here. History. For history, Mike Bloomberg got a 2. So they talk about stop and frisk, etc. They did mention that Bloomberg did donate a relatively small amount of money to fund charities that helped African Americans, not the Young Men's Initiative that he mentions throughout his campaign literature, but he used. But he also talks about Bloomberg getting a lot of African American leaders and mayors and things like this. He says he bribed his endorsers. He bribed Black endorsers. Okay. All right. For intentionality, Bloomberg got a 1. For intentionality, Bloomberg got a 1. The reason why I'm going through Bloomberg, even though Bloomberg dropped out, is because a lot of people are saying that we should go with Bloomberg because he has the best plan for Black America. Bloomberg dropped out, so now what do you do? One, I don't think he had the best plan. Based upon the scoring, Elizabeth Warren had the best plan and the most detailed plan. Elizabeth Warren got a 79. Biden got a 70. Buttigieg got a 66. Elizabeth Warren got a 79. Okay, but she dropped out of the race also. So intentionality. Let's say Bloomberg realizes that stop and frisk was wrong. Let's say he is sorry for promoting racial profiling and how he demonized the poor. Let's say that his funding of Republican politicians is in his past and that he is now ready to make amends. Okay, they asked the question, would you believe him? All right. Now, Bloomberg did say from the beginning, his number 1 goal is to defeat Trump. Okay, he just announced he's going to spend $2 million to register African Americans to vote. He's putting massive support behind Joe Biden. He said his number 1 goal is to defeat Trump. And lastly, impact. For impact, Bloomberg got a 3. Okay. A lot of Bloomberg's ideas would improve African Americans' lives. A lot of Bloomberg's ideas would improve Black life. But because of the lack of specifics, it is impossible to know what impact Bloomberg's plan will have on Black America. No one knows how much it will cost, what effect pressing, quote unquote, pressing police will have, or if making it rain on Negroes, or African Americans, he said Negroes, okay, it's Michael Harry. If making it rain, if spending money on African Americans will have a huge effect, impact. Plus, word on the street is that he plagiarized with many of these ideas. His entire criminal justice platform sounds a lot like Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris, because she dropped out before they did this analysis, she's not on here. Kamala Harris did have a Black agenda. It's at her website. I read it. It was like if I remember correctly, it was like 8 points. Okay. And it may have been called an urban initiative or something like that, but she did have a Black agenda. Okay. So that's Mike Bloomberg. Next is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders got a 50 out of 100. Okay. This is not an endorsement of any candidate. They're not beating up on any candidate. All right. Bernie Sanders' plan for racial justice is only a small part of his agenda for Black America. All right. Because I went to Bernie Sanders' website and looked at his different policies and racial justice, things like this. So first, economics. Sanders' plan for economic justice is very vague. It lists the most commonly known problem, the wealth gap, redlining, housing discrimination, which are problems and historical, come out of history of racism, legacy of slavery, Jim Crow. When we look at redlining, that's created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The redlining comes from the federal government. Homeowners Loan Corporation created in 1933. Redlining goes back to 1934, adopted by the real estate companies and the banks, etc. If you go to blackpast.org, blackpast.org has a good article dealing with redlining, okay? And the origin of the term redlining stems from the policies developed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, created in 1933 by President Franklin Roosevelt administration to reduce home foreclosures during the Depression and then institutionalized by the 1937 U.S. Housing Act, which established the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. Federal housing agencies, including the HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation, and the FHA, determined whether areas were deemed unfit for investment by banks, insurance companies, savings and loan associations, and other financial services companies. The areas were physically demarcated or marked with red shading on a map. In contrast, zones which were to receive preferential lending status were marked in green shading and intermediate areas in blue shading. Often these decisions were arbitrarily based on the area's racial composition rather than income levels. While the practice was almost universal before 1968, the Civil Rights Act passed that year, which is the Fair Housing Act of 1968, theoretically outlawed redlining. Now, they didn't have it really didn't have enforcement till 20 years later, till about 1988. Nonetheless, its impact was felt long after that date. In a series of Pulitzer Prize winning articles, which appeared in 1988 under the title The Color of Money, Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Bill Dedman, D-E-D-M-E-N, described how Atlanta, Georgia banks still discriminated by the racial designation of neighborhoods. His article illustrated how these banks were nearly twice as likely to lend to homeowners and prospective home buyers in low-income white neighborhoods as in affluent Black neighborhoods. So read the rest of this here. This gives some background information on redlining, which was created by the U.S. government. Okay, that's from blackpast.org. Then also, I encourage you to read the book, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. It's a really good book from NOI.org. Okay, check that out as well, because that has a lot. That's the third edition. I've read all three editions. But they deal with a history of a lot of these policies here. Dr. Claude Anderson deals with that in Black Labor, White Wealth especially, but this is a really, really good compact book right here. All right, so let's continue. So Bernie Sanders, economics, Bernie Sanders gets a 7. So the wealth gap, redlining, housing discrimination. It lists the most commonly known problem, his plan, and vows to fix them, but it does not say how he will do it. He seems to rely on his plan for income inequality to answer all questions. And according to this right here, he does not support reparations. Now, I've said this previously, and I said this on my Sunday night show. Two things to keep in mind. One, it is true as campaigns progress, a lot of their policies, they flesh out. A lot of the details of their policies, they flesh out. Okay, that is true. A lot of times that does happen. Okay, 1. 2, on reparations with Bernie Sanders, it was either June or July of 2019, the NAACP National Convention was held in Detroit at Cobo Hall. And they had the Democratic presidential candidate town hall. And journalist April Ryan, interviewed all of the candidates who were there. Bernie Sanders was one of them. Bernie Sanders said he supports H.R. 40, sponsored by Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas. Bernie Sanders, what he's maintained, however, is that when it comes to reparations, he doesn't support reparations in the form of a check, meaning 100% reparations, 100% in the form of a check. Okay, he doesn't support it because he said it will not bring about the structural change that's really needed to repair the damage of slavery. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, I've told you the same damn thing. I told you I'm against reparations being in the form 100% in the form of a check. Why? I told you before. If we all got $1 million a day or now $500,000, $750,000 a day, white people will have it all back this time next week. The only thing we would have stimulated is their economy. Every year we go to conferences, they talk about how we spend 97% of our dollars with people that don't look like us. if we get $500,000, whatever it is, 750,000, whatever it is, you think that spending pattern is all of a sudden going to change? It's going to get worse. So cash payments can be part of an overall comprehensive reparations package. But ain't nowhere in the hell it should be the only thing. No, one of the best things based upon history is the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866, because that actually happened. There is a historical foundation. There's a precedence for it. And like I said earlier, those policies are still being enforced for the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians. That's why we really have to go research that. We can look at people like Sarah Rector. There's a foundation for that. Okay, so criminal justice. Bernie Sanders' criminal justice program policy displays the same performance rhetoric. His details are not revelatory, and he offers no solutions except to say that he will solve the problems. So for criminal justice, you got a 5, economics, you got a 7. For education, Bernie Sanders promises to make college debt free for everyone who attends a 4-year college. He also plans to cancel student debt and give $1.3 billion to HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. Aside from childcare, his platform has very little, if any, information on reducing disparities in kindergarten through 12th grade education, okay? But once again, as I said before, with any of the candidates, as they progress throughout campaigns, especially presidential candidates, a lot of these policies, they do flesh out, give more detail to, et cetera. Senator Elizabeth Warren, she presented, you hear them roll out their various policies comprehensively as they progress, whether it's her Medicare for all, or whatever, her healthcare plan, whatever it is. There was one policy Bernie Sanders just came out with, I forgot what it was, but that happens. Okay, so the policies that they have at the beginning, the way the policies appear at the beginning of the campaign, they usually add more detail to it as they progress, if they last that long. All right, now, politics. Bernie said, okay, education. Education got a 4. Sanders promises to make college debt free for everyone who attends a 4-year college. He also plans to cancel student debt and give $1.3 billion to HBCUs. I said that. Politics, he gets a 4. Bernie Sanders wants to get money out of politics, stop gerrymandering, and reform voting, which will undoubtedly benefit African-American voters, but his policies are race blind. Number 5, comprehensiveness. Bernie Sanders' plan for Black America, well, he said, it reads like a first-year sociology student's midterm project. Okay. So I think he's trying to say he's kind of simplistic. While he hits the major talking points, they leave a lot to be desired. He relies heavily on the idea that his overall policies will improve the lives of America. Okay, so for comprehensiveness, he gets a 5. For blind spots, he gets a 5. Sanders does not have any egregious blind spots in his platform because it consists mostly of listing the problems and saying, you know, he can solve them, I've got this, etc. Feasibility, he gets a 4 for feasibility. As with other platforms, without any specifics, it is hard to say if Bernie Sanders could pass these detail-free policies. It's hard to say if he can pass these detail-free policies. As a legislator, he has not displayed much effectiveness in getting his proposals passed. Okay, so for feasibility, he gets a 4. For history, he gets a 6. Bernie Sanders voted for the 94 crime bill. As he talked about before, he voted for it reluctantly because it contained the Violence Against Women Act. So he's not happy about voting for it. He has made some problematic statements about African Americans, but he also has a history of being on the right side of most civil rights issues. We know he supported Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1988 when Reverend Jesse Jackson ran for president. Reverend Jesse Jackson came out and just endorsed him in the last few days. And he marched with Dr. King as well, okay? Now, they go on to say he also wanted to primary the first Black president. So this is something that came up when after Super Tuesday, Bernie Sanders, that next day, that Wednesday, March 4th, Bernie Sanders came out with a campaign ad featuring Barack Obama in the campaign ad, okay, praising Bernie Sanders. And those were old quotes, things like this, right? And there were 6 other Democratic candidates who had President Barack Obama in their campaign ads. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. So President Obama has not endorsed anybody, because a lot of people saw in one of the things that hurt Bloomberg, not just Elizabeth Warren kicking his behind in the debates. One of the things that hurt Bloomberg is that you had some African Americans who thought President Barack Obama endorsed him because they saw Obama in all these ads. And if you watch those campaign ads, the ones on TV, they had the dates of those quotes. Those were old quotes from like 2008, 2013, 2016, 2018. And they found out that Obama had not endorsed him. Okay. So that and some other things, caused the debacle. That's why the only, he didn't win any states. He won a territory, the Samoa Islands. Okay. He spent damn near $600 million in one of Samoa Islands. All right. So, okay. You got it like that, hey, I guess it's a tax write-off or something. But yeah, so Bernie Sanders contemplated running against President Obama in 2012. He didn't do it, but so a lot of people found out about that and said, well, wait a second, why do you have Obama in your campaign ad and you wanted to primary him in 2012? So for history, Bernie Sanders gets a 6. For intentionality, he gets a 3. And they say, here's where the problem lies, okay, with this plan. His Black agenda is performative at best. It is devoid of the kind of specifics that he displays in his tax plans, his healthcare proposals, and his income inequality policies. In interviews and in practice, he seems to regard issues of race as purely a class issue. And while race is inextricably tied to economics and class, white supremacy is not a math problem. One has to be intentional about confronting it, okay? Now, I've known about Bernie Sanders longer than most people because I've been doing radio 10 years. I study politics, report on politics, history, African history, economic empowerment, things like this. So I saw, before Bernie Sanders ran for president, I would see Bernie Sanders in documentaries like ALEC Exposed, ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC Exposed. I would see him in documentaries like Koch Brothers Exposed, KOCH, the Koch brothers, Charles and David Koch. And I would see him on MSNBC, okay? Now, and, he started in the House of Representatives in 1991. He's been an independent since he's been in Congress, okay? So one of the things that is confusing for some people is, and this comes up, but Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat. Not neither a Democrat nor Republican, but this is one of the criticisms, and this is one of the things that is confusing and causes some apprehension for some people, because even if you go to his U.S. Senate page at senate.gov, senate.gov is the official website of the U.S. Senate. Each senator in the U.S. Senate has a page at senate.gov, and it tells which party they belong to, which state they're from, gives background information on them, right? If you go to his page on senate.gov, it still says he's an independent from Vermont. So for some people, it's like, well, are you independent or are you a Democrat? Now, it is true he caucuses with the Democrats. He usually votes the way the Democrats do, things like that. You know, I like Bernie Sanders. I think Bernie Sanders is a good guy. But for some people, that, you know, it causes a problem for them. They're like, okay, make up your mind. Because the reason why is because in 2016, he joined the Democratic Party, ran for a Democrat, ran for the nomination, lost. He goes back to the Senate as an independent. Then he wants to run again. And for some people, it just causes a confusion. For other people, it's not a problem. But, you know, some people are just, okay, well, we're trying to figure out which one, what are you doing? And then, okay, so what did I say? Impact, you got a 7. Intentionality 3, impact, you got a 7. If Sanders' overall policies were enacted, low income and middle class Black people would undoubtedly see an economic benefit. That is true. It is a plan that includes Black people, but it is not a plan for Black people. Okay, so what it's saying is it lacks specificity. Tom Steyer got 62. Tom Steyer dropped out. Okay, Tom Steyer recently released his all-encompassing African-American policy. All right, so Tom Steyer dropped out. You can read his. Pete Buttigieg got a 66, his Douglas plan. He dropped out also. And then Joe Biden got a 70. So let's look at this. Joe Biden does not have a separate plan that spells out his vision for Black America. But here's what we found by examining his platform. And I saw this when I went and looked at all the candidates' platforms about a month and a half ago. And I talked about this in one of my broadcasts. And this is one of the things I was saying. I said, well, wait a second. You have people attacking Senator Kamala Harris and saying she didn't have a Black agenda. Now, some people were attacking her for other stuff, right? Okay. But you had some people saying she didn't have a Black agenda, and she did. It's at her website. I went and read it. But very few people were attacking Joe Biden saying that he didn't have a Black agenda. So, you know, my thing is, I think we need to hold all the candidates to the same standard. Because I think it's unfair to try to hold Black candidates to a much higher standard than you hold white candidates to. It's just like Senator Kamala Harris got a lot of backlash for her prosecutorial background. Her prosecutorial background was mixed if you research it. There were some good things and bad things, right? Well, Senator Amy Klobuchar has a similar background. Senator Amy Klobuchar did not get the amount of backlash that Kamala Harris did. Now, in the last 2 months, it has crescendoed more. It has crept up more with Senator Amy Klobuchar because of the Myron Burrell case. But the vitriol, all the videos people putting out about Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar didn't get that. So my thing is, okay, it's unfair to hold Black candidates to a much higher standard than you hold white candidates to. Amy Klobuchar was still in the race, still raising money until she, finally dropped out. Okay, so let's look at Joe Biden. Okay, so Joe Biden doesn't have a separate plan that spells out his vision for Black America, but here's what we found. And they have links to their platforms, their websites, so you go research this. Bernie Sanders is berniesanders.com. Joe Biden is joebiden.com. Economics. Biden specifically mentions redlining, housing discrimination, fair lending practices. He specifically mentions that. He offers boilerplate solutions on ways to tackle the wage and income gap, but he does single out Black maternal health and health disparities. He does not support reparations, okay? Now, in debates, when that comes up, he sidesteps the issue. In an article, and I think it was from Politico.com, it was around the time when, after the comment he made about working with segregationists. And if you go, I dealt with this extensively on my show because the way it was reported in the media, it is not exactly what happened. 99.9% of the time when they talk about this on CNN, MSNBC, they ain't tell you the segregationists he was talking about were mainly Democrats. That gets left out. Senator James Eastland of Mississippi was known as the mouth of the white South. Senator James Eastland was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Biden was mainly talking about Senator James Eastland and Senator Herman Talmadge of Georgia. Okay, these were two Dixiecrats. These were Democrats. So if you go, let me see. I'm going to give you the links because I don't want to get deep into this. I give you the links to the segments of my show. It's on YouTube. And I go take you step by step through this. And I show you exactly what he was saying and how a lot of this is being misrepresented, especially a lot of the black talking heads on MSNBC, things like this. And some of them I had to call out and I say, if you want to criticize what he said, that's fine. But why aren't you saying he was talking about working with Democrats? Because Senator James Eastland was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's the committee Biden was on. If you want to get anything done in the Senate Judiciary Committee, you got to work with the chairman. And Biden also in those same comments talked about how he totally disagreed with these men, but he had to work with them. These are guys in his own party. And he said he worked to defeat them also. So it's two clips I'm going to post here. One is, it was dealing with Kamala Harris and Kamala Harris in relationship to Joe Biden. This is from June 30th, 2019. Kamala Harris is black, but it seems like only when convenient. Joe Biden responds to controversy. So I provide all the documentation there. And then the second one is Joe Biden apologizes. Senator Kamala Harris backtracks on busing comments. That's from July 7th, 2019. Because I'm sitting there watching this stuff unravel. And Senator Kamala Harris, July 3rd, 2019, she made statements saying that busing should, forced busing, she said busing should be considered, but not mandated. So people start asking questions, well, wait a second. It sounds like you're against forced busing. So why were you attacking Biden? So that when that happened, because this is stuff I watch. When that happened, then she started to slip in the polls when that came out. Because it's like, wait a second. At the same time, in about 1973, there was a Gallup poll done where over 90% of African Americans polled were against forced busing. So people started asking the question, well, wait a second. You're sending mixed messages. Okay, so I'm gonna post both of these links here. And in the videos, those are segments of my radio show. And I put this on YouTube. All the documentation, I take you step by step, provide all the articles, all that stuff. So you can go research this yourself. Okay, so let's continue here. How's everybody doing? No, that's not true. President Obama did not informally endorse anybody. No, that's not true. Go do some research, Albert. That's not true. There were 6 candidates that were using Obama's quotes and images in their campaigns. That's not true. One of them was Elizabeth Warren, using quotes and images and video of President Obama from 2010, praising her for getting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau created. That's factually inaccurate. That's not true. And actually, if you read the article from, since you're going to post that, then you're going to make me pull this out on you. Because I dealt with this before. See, people have to do research. There was an article that dealt with the 6 candidates that were using the likeness of President Obama. And I'll give you that actual article so you can go read this, because you don't have to believe a word that I say. Proper documentation ends all conversation. Get past all this coronavirus stuff. Yeah, Politico.com, now starring in Democratic campaign ads, Barack Obama. The former president has made a point of not endorsing anyone in the 2020 primary. The presidential candidates have made a point of ignoring that fact. 6 candidates, Joe Biden, Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren, Deval Patrick, and Tulsi Gabbard, have included the former president in at least one of their TV and digital ads. This was before Bernie Sanders did it. So you got 7 presidential candidates. No, that's not, he ain't endorsed nobody. Let's see here. Go read this yourself. So you can use, if Obama made statements about you, you can use that in a campaign ad. That is not an endorsement. Go read this article, Politico.com, February 7th, 2020, now starring in Democratic campaign ads, Barack Obama. Then, I think it was thehill.com, they had one, Elizabeth Warren, about the ad Elizabeth Warren had using Obama in that also from 2010 comments. New Warren ad touts, let's see here. It's loading up. New Warren ad touts Obama's 2010 praise for Consumer Bureau. So Elizabeth Warren had President Barack Obama in the ad too. No, he didn't endorse nobody. All of them were using him in ads. Okay, so go read this here. Let me post this here for you. I dealt with this previously, but I guess some people missed that. That's the one from Politico. And here's the one from The Hill. All right, go research that. Simple Google search, you could have found this stuff. I'm just telling you. All right, so let's continue. I don't mean to go in on you, Albert, but the amount of work and sacrifice I do, when you call me disingenuous, I take that personally. I know you don't mean it that way, but don't do that. All right. Economic. Okay, so we did economics. Criminal justice. Again, Biden tackles most of the criminal justice issues that are prevalent in America. One of the unique areas that he confronts is the criminalization of girls, foster children, and abused children. He also puts effort into violence against women and reintegrating the formerly incarcerated. Okay, so for criminal justice, he gets a 7. Let me see here. Okay, so we know Joe Biden wrote the majority of the 94 crime bill. He read all of the 94 crime bill. That's not true. He wrote the majority of the 94 crime bill. I'm going to post the links. I'm in the process of reading the entire 356-page bill. Okay, one, the crime bill, however people are trying to define mass incarceration, all that stuff did not start in 94 with the crime bill. Okay, that's not true. You have to go back to June 17th, 1971, and Richard Nixon's war on drugs, because the U.S. prison population quadruples from 1970 to 1993. Violent crimes peak in 1991 in this country. In the early 1970s, after Nixon declares his war on drugs, states start passing longer, harsher sentences. The way states are handling drug usage starts changing. You start having movies like The French Connection, etc. So it's changing the way people are looking at drug addiction. 1973, Governor Nelson D. Rockefeller, governor of New York, comes out with the Rockefeller drug laws. This institutes mandatory minimums. Why did he come out with the Rockefeller drug laws? The reason why was because he wanted to run for president, okay? There was a changing mood in this country to punish drug use drug users, even low-level nonviolent drug users. So he originally had the stance of providing treatment for low-level nonviolent drug offenders. He changes that and takes a harsher stance to fall in line with the change in the national mood in the country. So he institutes the Rockefeller drug laws, okay? And the Rockefeller drug laws come out right about 1973, all right? There's an article from NPR.org, okay? NPR.org, National Public Radio, that deals with this. And it deals with like the history of the Rockefeller drug laws. So states start passing longer, harsher sentences in the late 80s, in the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s. This is before the crime bill. The crime bill is, the 94 crime bill is federal law, not state law, okay? So the majority of prisoners are in state prisons, not federal prisons, just historically, today and historically. The majority of prisoners are in state prisons, not federal prisons. About 87% or so of the people who go to prison since the crime bill was enacted, go under state law. What happened was you had, so you have different things in the crime bill. You had $9.5 billion for to go to build prisons in states that want to take advantage of this. 28 states out of 50 take advantage of that. You have about $6 billion for the the prevention courts or something like that. You have funding for 100,000 police officers, because people across the country, this is why you have to go research what was going on at that time. People across the country were calling for something to be done about the violent crimes taking place, the murders, all this stuff. Violent crime was buck wild. It peaks in 1991. White people were complaining. African Americans were complaining. People are putting pressure. Hispanics are complaining. People were putting pressure on their elected officials, their mayors, city council members, members of the House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, okay, to do something about the crime. 23 members of the Congressional Black Caucus supported the 94 crime bill. Now, that doesn't mean they supported every aspect of it, things like this, but there was tremendous pressure being put on them by their constituents. You had 10 big city mayors who did the same thing, as well. So you have the things like taking the funding for college education for prisoners. That was a bad move. Expanding the number of federal crimes that the death penalty could be used for. I think it was expanded to like 60 crimes. That's a bad move. No. Did it create mass incarceration? No. The incarceration rate in this country had already exploded. It goes from about 300,000 in 1970 to about 1.3 million in 1993. Okay. Did it add to it? Yes, it added to it. It goes to 95, it goes to about 1.5 million. It peaks at 2.3 million around 2008. From 2008 to 2016, each year, the U.S. prison population declines, okay? I encourage people to go to bjs.gov, Bureau of Justice Statistics, bjs.gov. At bjs.gov, you can look at the U.S. prison populations each year, okay? So you can see how this is increasing. We see it increasing in the 80s because you had Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, 1982. All right. So what happens is a lot of people want to start the clock in 94. It's like, no, that's not what happened. You got to go 20 years before that. You have to deal with this chronology, understand this history, continuing. All right. And then we see that in December 2015, the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years in December 2015 under President Obama. Very few people talk about this. The reason why is because when you study the Obama administration, people realized the war on drugs didn't work. Okay. People realized the war on drugs didn't work. So the war on drugs is winding down under the Obama administration. 2013, the Attorney General Eric Holder institutes the Smart on Crime Initiative, who is Obama's first Attorney General. Smart on Crime Initiative backed off of charging people with the longest, harshest sentences for low-level nonviolent drug offenders. This helped reduce now this is federal, that's federal law, that helped reduce the population, but that's federal law. States started backing off and having reforms in different states. So because of a combination of federal and reforms at state levels, you start seeing the U.S. prison population fall, okay? And if you look at, so I posted the link here for the article from NPR.org, deals with the Rockefeller drug laws. I'm going to post the link from Newsweek.com, which deals with the December 2015, U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years. It talks about that, and then it has the link to the study from the report from the Department of Justice that deals with this, okay? So you're going to have this take place. So I encourage people to, let's see, I'm going to post this link here. This is a summary of what's in the crime bill. And then I'll post a link to the actual 356-page crime bill. All right. But no, the increase in incarceration, that increase, the prison population quadrupled from 1970 to 93. That's before the crime bill. Okay. Were there some bad things in the crime bill? Yeah, there were. Were there some good things in the crime bill? If you actually read it, is mixed. I mean, there was some, the assault rifle ban. You need the assault rifle ban because the assault rifle ban brought down the mortality rate, people being shot. The other thing that a lot of people miss is that the way things were presented in the media, it was presented as if gang violence was a black thing. So they talk about black on black crime, right? Gang violence was worse for white people than it was for African Americans. If you actually look at the statistics, okay. If you look at the what happened was, I was up late one night doing research, and I read an article from, what was it? AtlantaBlackStar.com. Okay, and this dealt with, name of this article, this dealt with how white on white violence was worse than black on black violence, and how news outlets conceal it. Okay. So they list 9 facts, and I'm going to post this here for you. I want you to go read this. They list 9 facts. And let me pull this up here. Number 7 dealt with how 53% of gang-related murders from 1980 to 2008 were committed by white people. 53% of gang-related murders from 1980 to 2008 were committed by white people. 56% of the victims of gang-related murders from 1980 to 2008, 56% were white people. When you watch back in the 90s, when you watch the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news and the 5 o'clock news, that's not what you saw on the television, or the television, as I call it oftentimes. But that was the reality. On the television, it made it a black on black issue. It made it a black thing, and then also a Hispanic thing. No, crime was buck wild in the white communities too. It just wasn't reported in the media like that. All right. So one of the things that did was artificially inflated the home values of white people, which is tied to wealth. Why? For the majority of people, the largest investment they make, or one of the largest investments they make, is going to be their home. Well, when you have a lot of crime in your area, that depreciates the value of your home. So African-American homeowners, and every night on the evening news, they're showing the shooting here, shooting there, things like this, right? Living in that area becomes more undesirable, which depreciates the value of their homes. Well, if you had the same thing going on in a lot of white communities, but it's not being broadcasted like that, it artificially inflates their home value. And it reduces the home value of African Americans, which is then tied to our wealth. So if we look at this here, fact number 7, gang killings. I'm gonna post this link. I want you to go read all of this, okay? Gang killings. When gang-related killings are referred to on the news, they treat it as an almost exclusively Black problem. However, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics for the period of 1980 to 2008, a majority, 53.3% of gang homicides were committed by white offenders. And the majority of gang homicide victims, 56.5%, were white. So what happened was I saw that. And I was familiar with things like this because I read, there's a study from, there's an article from thinkprogress.org that you hear me cite a lot of times. And that's a study that came out March of 2015. And that deals with how news outlets convince you that most criminals are Black, okay? So let me post this here. Let me close these blinds. That deals with how news outlets convince you that most criminals are Black. So what I did was I went and searched for that study from the Bureau of Justice Statistics that they cited from AtlantaBlackStar.com. It's a 30-page study that dealt with homicides in the U.S. from 1980 to 2008. So I went and read the study. On page 12, table number 7, they have that information that shows that gang killings, the majority of them were done by white people. But that's not how it's projected in the media on the television. Okay, just a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, Anita said, I remember in 2014 at Nanny's Knowledge Cafe when it was on Woodward, you had a lecture about the crime bill. Yeah, well, I did one. Well, let's see, that one was slavery's back in effect. Then in 2016, I did one dealing with Richard Nixon's war on drugs, which was more comprehensive, okay? The one I did a lot of research on Richard Nixon's war on drugs in 2016. The reason why was because there was an article from Harper's Bazaar Weekly. The April 2016 issue of Harper's Bazaar Weekly had a front page story called Legalize It All. Legalize It All, it was written by a journalist named Dan Baum, B-A-U-M. Dan Baum interviewed John Ehrlichman, I think probably about 1994, something like that. John Ehrlichman was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor. John Ehrlichman was one of the people who got caught up in the Watergate scandal, and one of the people that worked for Nixon who went to prison. He spent 18 months in a federal prison. When he gets out of a federal prison, Dan Baum interviewed him sometime after that. He interviewed him. And John Ehrlichman, who was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor, he said, you want to know what the war on drugs was about? I'll tell you. He told Dan Baum that the war on drugs was targeting African Americans and targeting hippies in the anti-war movement, okay? All the news outlets carried the story. This was a huge story. This confirmed what a lot of people suspected. He said that we knew we could not make it illegal to be Black or be against the war. He said, but by associating marijuana with the anti-hippie movement, with the anti-war movement, with the hippies, by associating marijuana with the anti-war movement and associating heroin with the African-American community, then we could do surveillance on them. We could raid their offices. We could lock them up, etc. If you notice, heroin is a harder drug. It's a heavier penalty for heroin than marijuana. They associated heroin with the African-American community. They associated marijuana with the white community. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, so if you saw American Gangster starring Denzel Washington playing Frank Lucas, you have to ask the question, where the hell did heroin come from? We didn't grow it in our backyard. Now, today, some of us grow marijuana in our backyard. I ain't one of them. I don't use marijuana. We ain't grow, where did the heroin come from? Okay? So, one of the numerous articles that I have dealing with this, from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Nixon advisors said the war on drugs was a manufactured lie designed to target and disrupt the Black community. Okay, this talks about John Ehrlichman. But when you go and study the history of marijuana, and I'm trying to keep this brief. When you go study the history of marijuana, because it's complex, marijuana was legal in this country up until about 1937. To understand why marijuana was made illegal, you have to go study Harry J. Anslinger. Harry J. Anslinger was the chair of the National Narcotics Commission. Harry J. Anslinger led a campaign to make marijuana illegal. He testified in front of Congress. He said that white women crave Black men sexually when white women were high on marijuana. And he said marijuana was used by Filipinos, was used by Mexicans, things like this, okay? To understand this, so you got to understand the history of this country. Early on, I talked about some of the animosity this country has had toward Chinese. They've had animosity towards Mexicans, okay? What's going on with Trump? That happened in the 1930s. Because Herbert Hoover, who won the presidency in 1928, going into the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover, then Roosevelt, in the 1930s, the U.S. deported 1.8 million Mexicans back to Mexico. 60% of them were Mexican Americans. They were citizens here. And they said these people were taking jobs away from white people. Not African Americans. They said they were taking jobs away from white people. This is during the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover launches a campaign called American Jobs for Real Americans. American Jobs for Real Americans. This is Herbert Hoover, who became president in 1928 because the Republicans used a Southern strategy to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and target 5 former Confederate states to get the votes of Southern segregationist Democrats or Dixiecrats to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover. It was called the Lily White Movement in 1928. And this starts to shift between the political parties, and this is why African Americans start leaving the Republican Party, going to the Democratic Party. The Lily White Movement in 1928. So Herbert Hoover launches American Jobs for Real Americans. Well, if you know anything about America, a lot of this land belonged to Mexico. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Wyoming, all that. The U.S. gets that land because at the end of the Mexican-American War, the U.S. goes to war with Mexico over land. It's the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. So this stuff, this hatred targeting Mexicans, that didn't start with Trump. He just continued it. You got to deal with U.S.-Mexican relations going back about 170 years. Then the Mexican-American War ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848. That's how the U.S. got all that land. Okay? California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. That was all Mexican territory. Okay? So in the early 1900s, you have Mexicans coming into the U.S. And a lot of the hatred that the U.S. had for Mexicans is directed towards them. What we call marijuana was originally called cannabis or hemp when white people were using it. What happens is marijuana was a Spanish term. the hatred that a lot of white people in this country had for Mexicans who were coming into this country. And then they're saying that they're taking white people's jobs and things like this, and they're deporting them. And some of them were US citizens who were being deported. The Spanish term marijuana replaces cannabis or hemp. So you refer to it as marijuana. The hatred that white people had in general for Mexicans gets associated with that word. You have jazz singers, African-American jazz singers who are using marijuana. You have Filipinos, you have Mexicans, things like this. So they're reclassifying this. As long as white people were using hemp or cannabis, there was not a problem. The problem came when it was other people using it. So then they changed the way that is being looked at by the images being projected to people. So movies were put out like Reefer Madness, which comes out in the 1930s. There's a campaign to change the way people look at cannabis or hemp or marijuana. So then you have the marijuana prohibition tax in 1937 that comes about because of the campaign that Harry J. Anslinger leads. And this basically makes it illegal except for medicinal purposes. Then it's going to be, basically illegal after that. But it ties into who's using it, and it's targeting African Americans. So we have to understand history and politics, law, all this intersects. So the hatred that a lot of white people have for Mexicans, we got caught up in that. There's let's see, timeline.com has an article dealing with Harry J. Anslinger, timeline.com, and then theatlantic.com has one dealing with neuroscience. They have one dealing with marijuana and neuroscience. I'll pull up that link here, okay? So this is some deep history, all right? So you have to understand this history to understand how we got to where we are right now. When we deal with putting together an African-American agenda, you have to understand history and policies that were put in place and how those policies impacted us to understand the policies to put in place to get us out of that predicament, to take us to the next level. All right. African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We have a current promotion going on for a few more days. Buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Okay, we have a couple of new advertisers. Author DeKalb Walcott Jr. DeKalb Walcott Jr. is the author of the book Black Heroes of Fire, the history of the first African-American fire company in Chicago. Black Heroes of Fire introduces and describes the background of the members of Engine Number 21, Chicago's first organized paid African-American fire company. Find out what happens to them at this book, available at Amazon.com and also at the website BlackHeroesOfFire.com, BlackHeroesOfFire.com. The name of the book, Black Heroes of Fire, the history of the first African-American fire company in Chicago. And let them know you found out about this from the African History Network. All right. Now, a lot of people want to get into shape for 2020. We know spring is coming. And SheRanHerselfFit.com. SheRanHerselfFit.com can help you with this. Now, She Ran Herself Fit's mission is to inspire and motivate women to make healthy lifestyle changes. She Ran Herself Fit is a brand that promotes women living a healthy lifestyle by making small sacrifices in their daily routine and changing their diet. You can combat many of the different diseases that are prevalent in the African American community. Now, the founder of She Ran Herself Fit, her name is Felicia. She lost over 200 pounds by changing her diet and running. Now, running may not be your motivation, but find out what drives you to be fit. Visit their website. They have apparel at SheRanHerselfFit.com. They have apparel that can be purchased that will help you get that you can wear when you're working out and look good doing it as well. SheRanHerselfFit.com. Right now, some people are traveling, and we know even with the coronavirus, some people are still traveling as well. And blacklionleather.com has cultural accessories, cultural accessories for African Americans. Their motto is carry your culture, carry your culture. Visit their website, blacklionleather.com. They have unique travel accessories. They manufacture and sell online to the culturally inspired African-American traveler. They are 100% African-American owned and operated. Their motto is carry your culture, carry your culture. Visit their website, blacklionleather.com, blacklionleather.com. All right, let's continue here. And then also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, PayPal, or let's see, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me /the AHN show. Okay. And somebody mentioned, I think Olitha posted about the movie American Gangster. Now, from talking to some people who know about this, Frank Lucas wasn't as big as they portrayed him to be in the movie. It made a good movie. I mean, now Denzel Washington played that part so well that I almost didn't want him to get arrested, because I'm like, man, take your hands off of Denzel. What do you think you're doing? But, you know, watch Godfather of Harlem. That's on Epix. Godfather of Harlem deals with the relationship between Bumpy Johnson, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and Malcolm X. And there's a lot of fiction in there, but there's some history also. Okay, one of my teachers, Professor James Small, is one of the is a consultant on the project, because he was there in Harlem. He knew the people, and he knows the history. So check that out, Godfather of Harlem. Okay, on Epix. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so we were talking about Joe Biden. So Joe Biden got a total score of 70 economics. He got a 7 criminal justice. He got a 7. That's when we start talking about the 94 crime bill. Okay. So for criminal justice, again, Joe Biden tackles most of the criminal justice issues that are prevalent in America. One of the unique areas that he confronts is the criminalization of girls, foster children, and abused children. He also puts effort into violence against women and reintegrating the formerly incarcerated. It's also important to note that during the Obama administration, you had 25 investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments that led to 14 or 15 consent decrees. Okay, the Trump administration has largely taken a hands-off approach to policing. The Trump administration has largely taken a hands-off approach to policing, and they have backed off of the investigations into the police departments. There is basically no accountability for police under the Trump administration. Okay, so you have to pay attention to this. This is an example of how elections have consequences. And when Trump ran, the other thing is the usage of privatized prisons. Under the Obama administration in August of 2016, the Obama administration announced that they would not renew federal contracts for privatized prisons. The day that statement came out, the stock prices of Core Civic and Geo Group, who are 2 of the largest owner-operators of privatized prisons, took a big drop. Their stock price took a big drop. They donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, okay? Because Donald Trump supports privatized prisons. Trump gets in office and he reverses that initiative and uses privatized prisons. So when Trump gets elected, their stock prices go through the roof. Okay, Core Civic and Geo Group. All right, so this is an example of how elections have consequences. This ain't about one person. Okay, this is what people have to understand. No, this has, whoever's in office, this has wide-ranging impact on our lives, the quality of our lives, what happens, etc. All right, let's continue. Okay, so education. Joe Biden gets a 6 for education. Joe Biden tackles K through 12 funding. He tackles K through 12 funding, HBCU funding, and school inequality. He has one of the few campaigns that tie redlining and zip codes to education inequality. Okay. He has one of the few campaigns that tie redlining and zip codes to education inequality. He also focuses on putting African-American teachers into schools. And there's a correlation. There's a study, I forgot the name of it, but it's a study that shows that the relationship between having at least one African-American teacher, like I think we're in elementary school, and going to college. Okay. So he has one of the few campaigns that tie redlining and zip codes into education and equality. He also focuses on putting Black teachers into schools. His idea to offer a path from community colleges to HBCUs is innovative. So for education, he gets a 6. For politics, he gets a 5. The Biden campaign, let me refresh the screen here. The Biden campaign doesn't really address voting rights, except to say that he plans to use the Department of Justice against violators. He also wants to incentivize states to restore voting rights to felons, incentivize states to restore voting rights to felons, okay? We know felony disenfranchisement is big. One of the states that is big in is Alabama. And what you will see is states using felony disenfranchisement as a tool of voter suppression to reduce the number of African Americans who can vote. Okay, we saw what happened in Florida. Desmond Meade led the fight to get Amendment 4 on the ballot there in November 2018 to restore voting rights to about it's about 1.4, 1.5 ex-felons. Okay. And it passed. We saw the state legislature that's controlled by Republicans. They tried to pull some shenanigans. It went to court though, but they basically won their right to restore voting rights to these former felons. Okay, and that can change the landscape of the state legislature there in politics. And now all those 1.4 million ex-felons are Black. There's a lot of them who are white. Okay, so we have to understand these voter suppression tactics. How you doing? Okay, Corey, let's see who we got. Corey, is that Senator Cory Booker or is that another Cory Booker? Okay, we got Corey, Philip, Olitha. All right, so for politics, Joe Biden gets a 5. For comprehensiveness, Joe Biden gets a 9. Here is where Joe Biden has the advantage. In almost every area, now this is not me, this is the analysis. This is from the Root and the policy experts, everything. This is their analysis. Here is where Biden has the advantage. In almost every area, he can point to actual legislation and policy that he has passed or enacted during the Obama administration. Okay, the only thing that hurts Biden is that he can point to specific actions and legislative plans from his tenure as vice president. I'm not sure if they meant to say he can't point to that or what. I need to ask them about that, but you can read it yourself. Okay, so for comprehensiveness, he gets a 9. Here's something very important. A lot of people went to vote Super Tuesday. A lot of people vote now. A lot of people are going to vote in the next couple of weeks. They're looking at what's happening with the coronavirus. They're looking at what's happening when you have a president who's incompetent, who's not being honest with people, which increases more fear. And there was an article from Washington Post. And this article dealt with how Donald Trump has not learned the lessons of the 1918 flu pandemic, which killed 50 million people worldwide and killed 675,000 people in the US. And what happened when you study that, and I'm going to do another broadcast on this. I talked about it before in some of my broadcasts dealing with the coronavirus. But what happened is right here. Washington Post. Trump is ignoring the lessons of the 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions. Historians say the President Woodrow Wilson was president in 1918. This is during World War I. He was not honest with the public. They tried to cover things up. and this blew up. 675,000 people here in the U.S. died. Woodrow Wilson got the flu pandemic. History is repeating itself. History is repeating itself because Trump has come in contact with people who came in contact with somebody at the CPAC conference who was diagnosed with the coronavirus. So this is why Republican representatives Mark Meadows, Matt Gaetz, the little punk ass Matt Gaetz, who sat up there on the House of Representatives floor wearing a goddamn gas mask while they're debating this bill. Okay. Then a couple of days after that, what happened? Somebody in his district, he's from Florida. He's a Republican from Florida. Somebody in this district died of the coronavirus. So then he had to put out a statement. He looked dumb as hell after you sat here and made a mockery of it. People's lives are in jeopardy. People's lives are being disrupted. And now, because he had contact with somebody at the CPAC conference who was diagnosed with the coronavirus, now he has to go into a 14-day he has to sequester himself for 14 days. He has to go to 14-day isolation, okay? But here's the thing. Just a couple of days ago, he was on Air Force One with Trump. Trump is coming in contact with these people who came in contact with somebody at the CPAC conference who was diagnosed with the coronavirus. Trump says he feels fine. There's no need to take a test. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead with your bad self. History is repeating itself. I'm going to give you this link. Read this article from the Washington Post. Now, what's interesting is Trump's grandfather died of the Spanish flu in 1918. This was dubbed as the Spanish flu pandemic. His grandfather died of this. Trump is ignoring the lessons of 1918 flu pandemic that killed millions, historians say. See, this is why history is so important. And the people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. Those that don't know history are destined to repeat it. It's usually worse the second time around. Okay, so check out that article. Let's continue here. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I have all my DVD lectures there. We still have our Black History Month DVD bundle pack. It's like a 15 DVD bundle pack that's on sale. Those are all some of my lectures where I go deep into a lot of this information. Okay, so politics, Joe Biden gets a 5. For comprehensiveness, he gets a 9. For blind spots, he gets a 7. Joe Biden does not specifically address gerrymandering or voting security. He also does not mention white supremacist violence. Overall, his plan has few holes. Overall, his plan does not have a lot of holes. Overall, his plan has few holes. Now, I would say that when he announced he was running, he tied that into Charlottesville, and he talked about fighting for the soul of America. Okay, but based upon his plan analysis of it, he doesn't talk about white supremacist violence and things like that there. But when he did announce, he did put out the video that talked about Charlottesville and fighting for the soul of America. For feasibility, Joe Biden gets a 10. Okay. Biden has more legislative and executive experience than almost any politician in history. He also knows how to compromise to get laws passed. Okay, so they mentioned the 2-term vice president with President Barack Obama, et cetera. All right, for feasibility, he gets a 10. For history, he gets a 5. Aside from, so they talk about Anita Hill writing the crime bill, the disproportionately incarcerated African-American men. They deal with that as well. So for history, he gets a 5, okay? For intentionality, he gets an 8. Biden worked, so they talk about working for, talk about working for Obama as vice president, and he was surrounded by African Americans who were smarter than him. Okay, Susan Rice, Michelle Obama, Eric Holder, John Jay. Even though Michelle Obama didn't technically have a position in the administration, she was first lady. He said this might not seem like much, but 8 years listening to Black people is something few white people have ever done. Okay, 8 years of listening to black people is something few white people have ever done. It was Tara Dardell on AM Joy, either Saturday or Sunday morning, who talked about how a lot of African Americans have experienced training your white successor in at work and being undermined, working and being undermined, or you are the supervisor and you end up training somebody that gets promoted to a job that you know you should have, something to that effect, okay? And they talked about how for some African Americans it doesn't matter, but for others it may. They talked about how Joe Biden during the 8 years in general didn't show up President Obama, and for some people that means something to them because they've had experiences of training a white person on the job who has less tenure than them, less seniority, and then they end up getting the job that the black person should have had, okay? So I never had that experience, but for some people, they've had that experience, okay? So for some people, you know, it means something to them. For impact, he gets a 7. Impact, the last thing is impact, he gets a 7. Biden's policies are progressive, but not groundbreaking. He wants to fix inequalities through conventional means and left-center legislation. However, if enacted, they would make a significant impact. If enacted, they would make a significant impact. When I first saw them, so I went and looked at all the candidates when it was more in the race. And I looked at their policies about a month and a half ago. And so one thing I noticed about Biden, I said, well, damn, I said, he don't have a black agenda. I said, now I looked at his policies and I said this in one of my previous broadcasts. If you saw me, you saw this. I said, if those policies are enacted, they will positively impact us. I said, but people were attacking Kamala Harris and said she did not have a black agenda, and she did. But they're not attacking Biden, who doesn't have a black agenda. Okay, so this is why I said it in the beginning. I said we got to hold all the candidates to the same standard now. That's not fair. Okay, regardless of what you think about Kamala Harris, and I had some reservations, but in general, you know, I mean, she's sharp. I said this before. She's sharp. She's smart. I wouldn't want to prosecute. I wouldn't want to be prosecuted by her. If we were in a relationship, sure as hell wouldn't cheat on her, because can you imagine her interrogating you if you cheated on her? I mean, shit. Okay, so number 1 was Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren got a 79 out of 100. Elizabeth Warren got the highest score, all right? Elizabeth Warren dealt with sexism, things like that. She doesn't have a long history of relationships with the African-American community. Elizabeth Warren is sharp. Basically, any of the Democratic nominees or candidate are better than Trump's ass, okay? I'm telling you right now. She got a 79. So since she got the highest score, we'll go through and look at this. So her agenda was called a working agenda for Black America. We'll go through and look at this briefly. For economics, she got a 9. Okay, her plans offer specifics complete with dollar amounts and budgetary offsets. She has entire separate sections on entrepreneurs of color and farmers of color. And she backs reparations. Because when I went and looked at the plan, I said, dang. I said this looks good. For criminal justice, she got a 7. Elizabeth Warren approaches criminal justice reform with compassion and logic. She does not have any new ideas, but she outlines exactly how she wants to reform cash bail, sentencing, police brutality, and drug legislation. She, along with Tom Steyer, both include mental health reform in their criminal justice plans. Okay, so she got a 7. For education, she got an 8. We know she was a former teacher, and she makes sense. She was a former teacher, so it makes sense that her education plans are comprehensive. She separates K through 12 education from college reform. However, her college plans focus primarily on student debt and not HBCU funding or college programs. Now, she did say, I don't know if she said it before they came out with this, but she did talk about $50 billion in funding for HBCUs. So she has talked about funding HBCUs. I do know that. For politics, she gets an 8. Elizabeth Warren offered specifics. She does not just want to end voter purges. She wants to pass a law that bans removing people from voter rolls unless the voter affirmatively requests to be removed or there is objective evidence of a legitimate reason to remove them. Okay. She wants voting machines to be approved statewide and on the federal level before they can be used in elections. She vows to use executive authority to prevent voter discrimination. For comprehensiveness, she got a 10. Okay. Because she had a plan for everything. Okay. She has some things that I like. Perhaps no candidate in history ever had more detailed, comprehensive plans than Elizabeth Warren. Every single policy has a separate page explaining how she will accomplish it. She earned extra points for having an entire agenda for Black women, for African-American women. For comprehensiveness, she got a 10. For blind spots, she got a 7. It is hard to find holes in Warren's policies. She does not address college admissions. And she's a little too nice to racist institutions, okay? She points out discrimination, but tries to correct it with investments instead of criminalizing the institution for racist practices. Other than that, her plan is at least as comprehensive as her competitors. Feasibility, she got a 7. Warren's plan is expensive, okay? Unlike other candidates, she explains where she'll get the money. Unlike other candidates, she explains where she will get the money, but her wealth tax will be difficult to pass. See, a lot of stuff has to pass through Congress, both chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. So this is what you have to keep in mind, okay? And this is why Democrats taking control, and I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I study policies and I see who's blocking all this stuff. This is why Democrats have to maintain the House of Representatives and take back control of the U.S. Senate, in addition to the White House. All right. So feasibility, she got a 7. Her plan is expensive. Unlike other candidates, she explains where she will get the money from, but her wealth tax will be difficult to pass. She does have a legislative history and the ability to explain her policies by breaking them down with compassion. She's like a kindergarten teacher or a scientist speaking to Donald Trump, all right? And she got the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She got that bill passed and got it into existence. And Donald Trump has attacked the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Go research that. Number 7, history. Elizabeth Warren is the only candidate whose history is not marred by a problematic racist past. The whole Native American blunder might be irrelevant to most African Americans because, okay, all right, so it may be irrelevant to some African Americans. And she was a Republican until 1996, okay? For history, she gets a 7. For intentionality, she got an 8. It's hard to argue that anything about Elizabeth Warren's platform is performative because she has always displayed intention when it comes to diversity and inclusion. For impact, she got an 8. Elizabeth Warren's plan might not be the most impactful, but it is the most realistic plan. So you have to balance the impact, the sizzle, with how realistic is this? You got to balance that. A lot of times people don't, they're just enthusiastic and all this stuff. It's like, man, how you going to get this? How you going to get this passed through Congress? How much is this going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? This is one of the differences between older African Americans and younger ones, because older African Americans are going to ask a whole lot of questions. I did a presentation this past Friday at Detroit Unity Temple Church. And I think I talked about this on my Sunday show. When you go talk to African Americans that quote unquote baby boomers, you talk to some born during World War II, things like this, all the presidents they've seen, all the promises they've heard. My parents were born during World War II. My parents were born when Franklin Roosevelt was president. They've lived through Eisenhower, Roosevelt. They lived through Harry S. Truman, John Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford after Nixon. After Nixon resigns August 8, 1974, Gerald Ford, his vice president, became president. His first vice president resigned 8 months before that. That was Spiro T. Agnew, because Spiro T. Agnew got hit with corruption charges and tax evasion charges. So Spiro T. Agnew resigned as vice president. Then Gerald Ford became president, Gerald Ford from Michigan. Okay, they lived through Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, 2 terms of Ronald Reagan, 1 term of George H.W. Bush, then 2 terms of Bill Clinton, okay? Then 2 terms of George W. Bush, the son, then 2 terms of President Barack Obama, now this jackass. So they've heard, when you go talk to older African-Americans, usually they have a better understanding of politics. They understand that it's not just the president, it's the Senate and the House of Representatives. Many of them have been involved in politics. They work the polls. So you go talk to them, you have to know what you're talking about. You can't just go making promises and can't explain how you're going to fulfill this stuff and where the money's going to come from and how you're going to pay for all this stuff. Look, they can tell you who said it, what color suit they were wearing, what year they said it. They've heard all the promises, right? So when you go talk to them, you have to approach it differently. You have to know what you're talking about. Okay, so for impact, Elizabeth Warren's gets an 8. Elizabeth Warren's plan might not be the most impactful, but it is the most realistic plan. It is as progressive as Bernie Sanders, but she beats him or bests him on actual policy making. It also does not rely on, Bernie Sanders' rising tide lifts all boats theory, because it targets specific issues of race with precision. So for impact, she got an 8, okay? So check this out, read it in your entirety. This is not endorsing a particular candidate or anything like this, but with any of the candidates, we should go study their policies, understand how the policies of a president are going to impact African Americans. One, whether they have a Black agenda or not, their policies will impact them. Education, Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, relaxing the restrictions put on by the Obama administration, put on predatory colleges. Under President Obama, they shut down some predatory colleges like ITT Tech and Corinthian College, because African Americans and Hispanics were disproportionately being targeted by predatory colleges and these for-profit colleges. And then they're being saddled with student loan debt, not being properly placed in jobs that have anything to do with the degree they got, okay? And then they default on student loans. Now they're saddled with debt, then they can't get a job. So the Obama administration put student loan forgiveness in place. Under Betsy DeVos, she tried to back out of that and delay it. And she has relaxed the restrictions on predatory colleges. You look at the Department of Justice under Attorney General William Barr and Attorney General Jefferson Borgard Sisters III, and how they're reversing the policies from the Obama administration. You look at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, how that's been gutted, and their civil rights departments throughout all these departments, Department of Justice, the Department of Education, everything. And you go through and you see how they have totally reversed all this. They're totally reversing this. The problem is a lot of these policies, many African Americans don't know exist. So you got to go read this document. You heard me talk about it before. It's still at whitehouse.gov. Trump hasn't taken it down. Progress of the African American community during the Obama administration. Progress of the African American community under the Obama administration. How do you protect gains that were made if you're under the misconception that no gains were made? That's false. This shows you directly how policies from the Obama administration directly, positively impacted African Americans. Many of these have been attacked or reversed. Right now, the Trump's Department of Justice is in court, and the U.S. Supreme Court is going to pick this case up after the election, trying to repeal the entire Affordable Health Care Act and take away health care from 20 million people. Try to repeal the existing pre-existing conditions, protect that. The Affordable Health Care Act gave health care to 3 million non-elderly Black people who did not already have health care. That was the Affordable Health Care Act, okay? So they go through, they deal with education, they deal with criminal justice, all this stuff. They deal with the fact that the U.S. prison population dropped to the lowest point in 20 years under President Obama. Trump talks about the First Step Act. Go research the First Step Act. First of all, they tried to get that passed under in the Obama administration. It was blocked in the Senate in 2015 by Senators Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, who's against criminal justice reform, and Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. There was bipartisan support between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, but those two senators blocked it from passing. Jeff Sessions becomes Trump's attorney general. He leads the Senate. So they're able to get it passed in the House of Representatives. There was black people in the House of Representatives, like Cedric Richmond of Ohio. There was black members of the Congressional Black Caucus who worked to get that passed. Trump gets all the credit. Okay? When Trump ran in 2016, he did not run on the platform of criminal justice reform. He ran on the platform of law and order. You got to get this straight. The person in the White House who was pushing the First Step Act was not Trump. It was Jared Kushner. Why? Because Jared Kushner's father was sent to prison. Who sent Jared Kushner's father to prison? It was U.S. Attorney Chris Christie, who became governor of New Jersey. This is why there was tension between Governor Chris Christie and Jared Kushner, which is why even though Chris Christie was on the transition team, once Trump won through the Electoral College and the help with Russia, Governor Chris Christie did not get a position in the White House because Jared Kushner advocated against him. He had to inform because it was Chris Christie that sent Jared Kushner's father to prison. So Jared Kushner was the one in the White House who was really pushing the First Step Act. That wasn't Trump, because Trump did not campaign on criminal justice reform. Not only that, Trump campaigned and said that when he was interviewed March of 2016 on MSNBC by Chris Matthews, he said that privatized prisons seem to work very well and seem to save money. They don't do either one. And he was supported by Core Civic and Geo Group. Okay? So this is why you got to study this stuff. I'm going to give you the link to this here. Go read this. You deal with federal judges, right? A lot of people don't know President Barack Obama made 62 lifetime appointments of African Americans to serve on the federal bench. That never gets talked about. That included 9 African Americans to the circuit court judges. It also included the appointment of 53 African American district court judges, including 26 African American women appointed to the federal court, to the federal bench. Those are lifetime appointments. That never gets talked about. I wonder why. In total, 19% of the president's confirmed judges have been African American, compared to 16% under President Bill Clinton, 7% under George W. Bush. Okay, 19% of President Obama's confirmed judges were African Americans. That's more than Bill Clinton and more than George W. Bush. Go read it now. Democrats had not lost control of the House of Representatives in 2010 because of the rise of the Tea Party and the backlash to the Affordable Health Care Act. They could have gotten more bills passed, like the American Jobs Act, which was blocked in the House of Representatives, and the infrastructure bill as well, which was blocked in the House of Representatives as well. Okay, that's at whitehouse.gov. Progress of the African American community during the Obama administration. This stuff here don't get talked about. And Trump is consistently and vehemently, with a vengeance, reversing all these policies from the Obama administration and reversing the regulations dealing with the environment. That's going to have a catastrophic effect, because we know he said previously climate change is a hoax. There's an article from New York Times that looks at 95 regulations, 95 pieces of regulation that deal with the environment that Trump has attacked or weakened, that were held over, that were from the Obama administration or from previous administrations, kept in place. And Trump has attacked these regulations, weakened them, in some cases totally reversed them. Let me see if I can pull this up right quick, because the computer's freezing up on me, okay? So I hear a whole lot of people talking about economic empowerment, things like this. I'm all for that. My degree's in business administration. I did manage the business consulting company for 7 years. I managed a company where we had contracts with the city of Detroit, county of Wayne, state of Michigan. I understand that better than most people. But I also understand that politics creates the environment that your business operates in. I also understand that. You ever try to run a Black-owned business in a recession? So a lot of times, we talk about economic empowerment as if it operates independent of politics and the environment, the economy. No, it does not. Let's see here. Let's pull this up. This is from New York Times. All right, how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast. This type of information you're gonna hear a whole lot of other places, right? I'm telling you right now, you ain't gonna hear this type of information all other places. While this loads up, be sure to follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. If you don't know me, this is your first time. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. Turn on live notifications so you know when we go live. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on live notifications there. You can also donate to the African History Network. That helps us keep doing the research, pay the bills, stay on the air, helps when I have to pay to travel to speak at different locations. $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App. Then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show through PayPal. Let me try to pull this up here because one came up, but that's not the one I was looking for. It's dealing with environmental it's dealing with environmental it's dealing with environmental regulations. Let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, here's another one. That's a good one. Which Obama era rules are being reversed in the Trump era? Which Obama era rules are being reversed? It's from New York Times. Okay, I'll post the link for that one. But I don't know why this isn't coming up. I think it was New York Times dealing with regulations. Just a second here. We'll try to squeeze in some of your questions here. Let's look at this. Okay, John, he said the whole administration needs to go. Hey, man, I ain't never seen corruption like this, brother. Oh, my God. Not in this country. This administration right here, and you got his children also getting rich as well at the same way sitting in office. I ain't never seen anything like this before. And now I've talked about this before, okay? This is how dictatorships get started. You got to go study Adolf Hitler in 1936. Hitler was elected by the people. And Hitler and the Nazi party, which was a political party, started ignoring the Constitution. Let's see here. That's not coming up. Let's look at some of your comments. Okay, so we got John Tammy. Student loan repayment program was under Bush. Well, that was one. No, it was under Obama administration. They target predatory colleges. There was one dealing with predatory colleges and student loan forgiveness. There was one under Bush, and that was being Betsy DeVos was ignoring that and dragging her feet on it, and she was sued dealing with that. She was sued by different departments, the state attorney generals, in the suing her behind that. Okay, yeah, this is the article I'm looking for from New York Times. is loading up with 95 environmental rules being rolled back under Trump. This was last updated December 2019. This is Times. You got to read this, okay? When you deal with the environment that impacts African American asthma, bronchitis, stuff like this, these policies don't say black, but they will impact your ass, okay? 95 environmental rules being rolled back under Trump. Down federal regulations a priority. His administration will help from Republicans in Congress. His administration, with help from Republicans in Congress, has often targeted environmental rules it sees as burdensome to the fossil fuel industry and other big businesses. A New York Times analysis based on research from Harvard Law School, Columbia Law School, and other sources counts more than 90 environmental rules and regulations rolled back under Trump. Our list represents two types of policy changes: rules that were officially reversed and rollbacks still in progress. Okay? And they break this down by category. Air pollution. There's a census report that comes out every 10 years. Okay, we know this. There's an annual census report that comes out every September that deals with poverty and income. The annual census report that came out this September 2019, that one dealt with, one of the things it talked about is how there are less people who have health insurance today than when Trump came into office. Okay, when Obama came into office, Trump came into office, January 20, 2017. It also talked about the quality of air in communities across the country has deteriorated over the last 3 years, which is tied to the rollback in environmental regulations. Okay, so this deals with air pollution and emissions, drilling and extraction, infrastructure and planning, toxic substance and safety, water pollution, okay, water pollution like Flint, Michigan, water pollution. And there was one regulation that just reversed dealing with regulating water. And a lot of the activists are saying this is like the worst reversal in regulation in decades. Okay, so we'll post that here also. Olita, this is so true, Michael, how we support and train whites and their trainees get promoted. Oh, yeah. A lot of people have talked about that in the past. A lot of people have talked about that. Okay, we got Anita. It happened to me in the corporate world, Anita Kent said. The congressman from the state of Georgia. Yeah, congressman from the state of Georgia, Georgia, a Trump sycophant, Doug Jones, not Doug Jones.